All right, folks, it is definitely another exciting day here on Wednesday. Of course, I did step outside. It's a little warm here in North Carolina. We did have a couple of cool days, and definitely it's starting to get warm again. I'm thinking the temperature might be around 90 degrees or something like that, but it was definitely a little bit on the sunny side and the warm side. So that's one of the things that's going on here in the world. And I do know that I was glad to see that the Clippers just blew out their opposition this last time. So, I'm rooting for them because of being a schoolmate of Doc Rivers, so I would like to see him get one more championship in the NBA. I know a lot of folks are saying that they are favorites along with the Lakers and along with the Milwaukee Bucks and a number of other teams, but they've been in a dogfight because it's only 3-2, and even though they blew them out, I'm not necessarily like writing off the opposition either because they did win that last second shot and did pull that off in game 4. So we do know that anything is possible in the world of sports. So I am not writing off the opposition, but I am hoping that the Clippers can go ahead and win on tomorrow. But like I said, a number of things are happening around the world because we've got, of course, the COVID crisis. We've got a number of other things going on, including some protests that have been met with violence. I know that that was happening in Kenosha, Wisconsin earlier today. So and they've been having some ramifications around that and how people are responding. Of course, the RNC is going on with their convention and things of that nature, or as I like to call it, the Donald Trump show, because it seems that it's just a lot of his family members, a lot of folks like that that are engaged in the conversation. And so they're just out there doing their thing. So I was definitely checking that out and seeing what they were all about. And as I was telling some of my guests that will be joining us on the show shortly, I do know that COVID has definitely been impacting folks because, of course, folks are going on and they are coming to school and then they're having clusters. Those clusters might be in frat houses, they might be in sorority houses, they might just be in general living situations, apartments, and all of that. So it is my understanding that a very dear relative of mine might be coming back from East Carolina because she went off to college. And now I understand that she's got to come back because of some spikes that are happening in that town, which is Greenville, North Carolina. And then I've also heard from some other people that are either coming back or doing the hybrid model, because we do know there's the hybrid model where you're partially in school and partially online. I am a big fan of actual in-person learning. I think that you learn better that way, but that's just what I think in terms of education. But I do know that these are hard times, and that a lot of times folks cannot understand what's going on and things along that line. So we have to do things according to what's best in our situation. I've got a dear friend of mine that has joined me as well. So definitely I'm hoping that Apollo will unmute himself so we can engage in some conversation with him as well, because Apollo I met through Sri Srinivasan, who does some COVID talks and some other talks around the community. I know that he's living in Las Vegas, but he's in the process of moving right now. So he's moving to the New Jersey area. He's lived in New Jersey. He's lived in New York. He's lived in a number of other places. And I want to say he's originally from Los Angeles. But I'm just fascinated when I find out that folks are actually doing work. And I know a lot of folks who are doing work in Vegas. And of course, everybody, when they think of Vegas, they think of the Strip and that whole area where the gambling goes on and all of that. I went to Vegas for the first time ever about let's see, it wasn't this past New Year's, I believe that's right, because I was at the beaches of North Carolina this past New Year's. So it was the New Year's before. So I actually spent New Year's Eve there in Las Vegas, visiting some friends that were in that area. So enjoyed the area. I was actually shocked when I got off the plane that the slots were already waiting for me. They were ready to reel me in and sucker me in and all of that stuff, but I actually didn't do that much slot playing while I was there. So glad to have Apollo here on the show with us. Glad that you were able to join us. I know that you're real stressed because you're making that move, and I definitely understand the stress of moves and all of that. So Apollo, if you would, please share with us a little bit about yourself. Like I said, I'm not even sure what business you're in while you're in there in Vegas. I know a number of folks there are involved in the gambling industry, and a lot of that has been hurt by COVID. But if you would share with our folks that are around the globe and watching from IBM on the IBM TV network, a little bit about yourself, and then we'll see your take on what's going on in the world. So like I said, I know Kenosha had some things. Of course, California had some things in terms of Black Lives Matter. But I would like to hear your take on what's going on. But first, I'd like folks to meet and learn about Apollo. So Apollo, tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your background.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Mark.
Yes.
And so I'm originally from Los Angeles. My family is from there for many generations. And then One side is from Texas and the other side is from Louisiana. And I left Los Angeles at 19 to move to the East Coast because I never got a driver's license. I grew up in Los Angeles in the 1980s when it was very smog heavy. And I remember the brown layer. And in Los Angeles, people don't realize, used to have one of the country's largest public tram networks. And then all of that got torn out from the 1940s until the 1960s when they built the interstate highway system and gave buses. And then buses took over a lot of those old streetcar routes. So, I mean, in Europe, I think they call them trams. In America, we call them streetcars. So I kind of, from an early age, thought that, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. And since I believe in public transport, I'm going to stick with that. But unfortunately, in the western part of the United States, unlike certain places like San Francisco, you really don't get a very robust public or mass transit network. So I moved east. I went to college at Amherst. And then later on, I went to grad school at Columbia University. And then I've lived in India. And I went into international development. My profession is communications, media and communications, and in that vein, I've worked for the African Development Bank, and I've worked also for the World Bank. And since moving to Las Vegas, I've been able to get into insurance. So I have about 40 insurance licenses across the country, and right now I'm currently working for a pharmaceutical benefits management company, which will remain nameless. And I basically work as a pharmacy services representative, which is basically completing their orders. It's not a clinical position as such as a pharmacy tech or a pharmacy position, but I basically just make sure that people get their orders and things like that on time. So Vegas definitely is a very interesting city. It's very hot these days because it is the tail end of summer, but it has a lot more to it than the Strip. The Strip is definitely how it got started. The gambling and the drinking. And for me, one of my side hustles is mental health advocacy. So I came here to help a relative. And so since being here, I've actually reinforced a lot of my own coping mechanisms around mental health so that I could avoid a lot of the addictions that are just rife and encouraged here. As Marc mentioned, as soon as you get off the airplane, you get the gambling and the slot machines and all of these things. They're in the supermarkets. So, and nobody thinks anything of it. They just see it as a very normative part of the environment here. But I look at it a little bit differently, and I just wonder if whether or not people are aware of how routine and I guess routine as well as entrenched some addictions can be, gambling being one of the main ones, drinking another. So since being here, I've gotten really into yoga and meditation, and actually quit smoking in one of the places in the world where you can smoke indoors inside of a casino. I quit smoking. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell for right now.
Well, that's great. That's a lot of great information that you shared with and everything. Well, the thing where I was surprised when I went to Vegas was I was not aware of like the inner cities that existed in Vegas. I actually went by. I didn't go to it because my friend didn't necessarily want to go to it, and I wanted to engage those folks that I was visiting, but they were having a Kwanzaa celebration, and it was in another part of Vegas away from the Strip. I do remember going to see a show. I believe it was Drumline that was taking place at one of the theaters there in Vegas. So Vegas seems to, like you say, have more to offer than just the Strip. But I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about your view, and I know you're going to move, but your view of how race relations are perceived in Vegas and also just the city in general, because I do know that there are like some inner city communities, for lack of a better term.
Right. Well, I mean, Vegas is a strange animal because it is a real win-lose town. And let me give you an example of what I mean. If you get an eviction on your record in Las Vegas, no one will rent to you unless you are really good with the landlord. As a rule, people will not rent to you. So what happens is you have these large complexes like Harbor Island or Seagull Suites. And what these are weekly hotels where people go and they pay week by week. And if you add it up, it's actually more expensive than having a year leased. If you have a year leased apartment, you pay more in these weekly hotels than you would monthly under a year lease. But what also sort of happens here is that within these housing situations, you get your own sort of like social culture and economics behind it. So Vegas is one of the only cities that I've been in where if you just know how to sign your name, but you can sell a vacation package over the telephone, you can get $700 right off the bat. And you can do that. If you can do that regularly, then you can make actually really good money and not have a real definable skill such as writing or computer or IT or anything like that. So but the issue with that is that if you are able to sell that way, and you are able to make money that way, what happens is if you're trapped in one of these weekly motels, this is where you also get a lot of entrenched addiction. So when I got here, I was looking for a job, and I was actually selling newspapers, believe it or not. This is even after the millennium. People are still selling newspaper subscriptions. And you had people who were really good at it, and they were able to sell these newspaper subscriptions to the tune of making hundreds of dollars a week, even thousands. But then by the time the payday rolled around 2 weeks later or a week later, they would be broke, and you'd be wondering what's going on here. And then you find that, they have a pill habit, or they have another sort of addiction that generally eats up their money. So and so in this way, these large apartment complexes are what I call Hotel Californias. Many people enter, but they never leave, because then they're on this loop of addiction of getting high and then needing to get more money and then get high. But the other thing is that there's a large homelessness population here. So even though, and this is even worse, if you find yourself on a complete outs where you are unable to work, then there are people who are just homeless, and it's very hot here, it's very dry here, and they really do look like they're in a bad way. And you can also see people who, they're carrying their luggage around. But I mean, Vegas, it can be good if you have like the skills and things that you need, with any skills that you could take to New York or Los Angeles. You can definitely come to Vegas and have a good life here in Summerlin. But Summerlin is sort of to the west of the city. It tends to be a bit more upmarket, and it tends to be where you have a lot more corporate jobs and things like that. In the city itself, in Las Vegas, you have a lot of sales positions, and you have a lot of things tied to the gaming industry. And then in terms of just like the different pockets, the different neighborhoods, you have North Las Vegas. I think a lot of African Americans live in North Las Vegas. What I've observed with the police department here is I've been able to observe a lot of police officers here who are actually African American, which is important to me because I am African American. And it reminds me that when I was growing up, there were lots of Black towns in the West. And so there is definitely a long-term Black community that has been in Las Vegas for a long time, as well as in the Nevada region, as well as the Inland Empire of California. So that's actually a hidden history of the West that often doesn't get discussed because a lot of people are just unaware of it. After slavery, people did not want to have to deal with segregation and racism. So they came out west and bought parcels of land in the desert and started towns. And so some of those individuals and their descendants are also here in Las Vegas. So it's a very diverse city. I was really surprised to see there's a large Filipino community here, a large, Asian American community here. So it's very diverse. It isn't any one thing. And I dare say it's really hard to generalize about Vegas, but you can make some typical statements about Vegas that are true.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And now you talk about that history. I remember there was a hotel there in Vegas. I don't remember the name of the hotel, but I remember it was an African American hotel. I don't think that it exists anymore. I don't know if you know anything about the history behind that hotel, but if you do, I'd love for you to share a little bit to our listeners about that. But I do remember that that was one of the things that grew and developed, because I want to say that it had a lot of the amenities that some of our modern hotels and casinos have out there, but it was a smaller version, an African American version. So, like I said, I'm not sure how much of the history of that town you know, but if you know any of that and can share that, I would love for you to do so.
Well, I mean, the thing about Las Vegas is that it's a fairly new city. It was incorporated in the in the 20th century, I think 1907 or something like this. But and there was some segregation in Las Vegas to a certain degree. But I was not able to really get into, I don't know. I'm not aware of this hotel, and I was not able to really get to understand a lot of the history of some of the neighborhoods here in Vegas. And Vegas is also very hot most of the year, so it's really hard to take walking tours. So I'm sorry, I don't have any information about this hotel, but it makes sense because even when entertainers were here, like say Dorothy Dandridge in the 1950s, where were they staying? They could not stay in the Sahara. They could not stay in the Flamingo. They could not stay at the Cowboy. And so odds are they were probably staying at a black-owned establishment here in the city. And I think there was a boxer here, I think Sonny Liston, who was here in the 1950s. And a lot of people, you'll get people who've been in Vegas. There are people who were born and raised in Las Vegas, and they will tell you to your face, point blank, it was a lot better when the mob ran it.
Wow.
Before it became corporatized.
So they actually liked it better when it was being run by the gangs and things of that nature. That's interesting. I actually had heard some folks say that, and they were actually surprised when it became corporatized. And I know that there was even some folks in Vegas that were not too pleased when certain powerful folks in the corporate world came to Vegas, because I know that even the current person that's sitting in 1600 has some investments in Vegas, as do some other corporate types. So I would love to hear your take on the corporate ties that are existing now in Vegas, because I just find that really fascinating, because you're not the first person that's told me that. I've had some other friends, including one who has moved back to North Carolina from Vegas, that have talked about that corporate tie. And that one friend that's moved back to North Carolina or North Carolina, Virginia area was working in the casino industry. I think she might have been involved in like one of the Darden enterprises. And for those that don't know, Darden owns Red Lobster, Bahama Breeze, and a number of other kinds of restaurants and things of that nature. But I know they have some properties there in Vegas. So I was just wondering if you could share with us your take about the corporate mentality of Vegas now.
Well, from what I've observed, I mean, it's really interesting because before it became corporatized with the MGM and Caesars and all of these large hotel casino companies, it seems like if, for example, say a business deal went wrong or someone crossed someone, they will always say, don't kill them in the city. They'll invite you to leave the city, and then they'll kill you in the desert and bury you there. So there's, as far as I know, it's a rumor, but I think before it became corporatized, there was a lot of this sort of internal justice, sort of internal communal justice that didn't touch mainstream legal structures such as the court system, right? Because, who knows whether or not they were doing something legal in the first place. And so how would how can you take something illegal into the court system without getting yourself compromised? But since you have the arrival of all of these corporate entities, you have the internationalization of Vegas. You also, because you have the internationalization of Vegas, you also have the coordination of regulation and laws and expectations around Las Vegas that make it much more akin to any other large metropolis in the world, even New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco or Toronto, for example. And so because of that, I look at it and I say, okay, well, this looks relatively normal to me. I don't see where there could be any obvious corruption, but it's still here. There's still that layer of it. I don't suggest anyone go looking for it, but it's still there. And so what that has enabled Vegas to do is to expand beyond the gaming center. So, for example, Howard Hughes used to own Summerlin, for example, but for a long time, it was undeveloped. So within the last 20, 30 years, Summerlin has become more developed. My job is a mainstream PBM out of the East Coast. It's here. You have a lot of call centers here in Las Vegas, and a lot of these call centers are the third parties for companies that you may know, such as, major loan company, major insurers, for example, for example, USAA, for example, or Hiscox, and so what happens is you have a lot of people here who, or AT&T, so you have a lot of people here who you may be speaking to, say if you need your bill serviced by AT&T, you could be calling a call center in Vegas, speaking to someone who's third party. So even though they answer the phone as if they're an AT&T employee, they're actually third party and working in one of these call centers here. And so that's what I think the corporatization of Las Vegas has enabled it to do. Now, the thing is that hopefully that will translate into the education system, because this is known as the Alabama of the West, because it has one of the worst education systems in the nation. And it's apparent. I mean, I really do have some sympathy, or rather empathy, for individuals who are born and raised in Las Vegas, and say if their parents didn't have wherewithal and they lived in Summerlin where they could get a better education, you can see how some individuals they're not really given a chance to really develop into all that they can be, because it's just not available to them. So then what you have is just people who are, growing up in Las Vegas, growing up in the milieu and the environment of Las Vegas. And you can see how that can also sort of trap them in a place like Las Vegas. Las Vegas is one of these places where if you get a jaywalking ticket, the fine is $200. But if you do not pay that fine, they will pick you up. They will send a marshal after you for a jaywalking ticket. And that's also something about Las Vegas, is that you have, because it is sort of this resort town, and because it also trades on this idea of being an adult playground, if you step out of line, the law is ready to capture you. And there are a lot of bail bondsmen downtown, a lot of bail bondsmen. Sometimes you can't even throw a rock without hitting a bail bondsman. So that's something that I think really sort of opened my eyes here. And then when you consider the addictions and loops and, the looping behavior like that, you really do find that there's a symbiosis here that relies on each other, law enforcement, and then, of course, people breaking the law itself. And that's something that I found a little disconcerting since living here.
Wow, that's really interesting. I want to bring in, because you said that you were doing some stuff around the whole concept of finances and things of that nature. So Jim Eade is one of my partners in crime. Shakeel Latimer, who's out of Australia, but who has lived in a number of other parts of the world. I know you've traveled around the United States, and you've actually also been Apollo to India. So you've traveled around the world as well. But I know that you're doing stuff in the whole kind of like finance world. Shakeel is the master of the finance world. So I wanted to bring Shakeel in so that you can meet him and y'all can meet each other and everything. By the way, Apollo is in the process of moving. So he's like in a state of kind of like really kind of frazzled by the move. And I can definitely understand that, because I have moved as well. So don't feel like he's just like being hiding for no reason. He is definitely a little bit on the kind of concern about that move. And I know you've moved in the past. Others have moved in the past as well. So we definitely have sympathy for you as you prepare to move from Las Vegas to New Jersey. So that being said, Shakeel, you heard a little bit about the conversation. I was wondering if you could jump in and just maybe even give him and Apollo some advice about traveling in these worlds, because he is definitely involved in the finance world. He talked about that to us a little bit at the beginning, but if you could share a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, firstly, unfortunately, I haven't actually gone back to the mother country. We're 10 generations away from India, so I unfortunately haven't been there, and I don't actually know an awful lot about the place. So that's a sad sign. I did actually, on my last trip, or 2 trips ago, manage to make my way through to Vegas. Had a great time. So I'm not one for giving financial advice, but what I will say is if you're going to go to Vegas and you're going to have a good time, set yourself a budget.
Yep.
And before you've set yourself that budget, pretend in your mind, just know you're going to lose it.
Yes.
And if anything else happens, if you leave with a single dollar, just count it as a win.
Yes.
So I have a very, very good friend of mine that lives in Henderson.
Okay.
And she actually sits on the board of the Neon Museum.
Cool.
Now, coming from Australia, we see all the movies that they come from Vegas, and we have that great movie with Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci.
Elvis.
And I actually had a little bit of a win when I first started off. I had won about $15,000, and I thought, oh my goodness, am I going to get my legs broken? Am I going to end up in the desert? Terrible. So I promptly lost that $15,000 that I won. I ended up winning it back again, but that's not the point. And ended up on a $3 Willy Wonka poker machine, or you guys call them slots. And so I put, I think, $200 into the machine. I was there. I didn't even realize. It was completely lost track of time. I was there for about 2.5 hours. But it was a lot of fun. I kept getting these different features and stuff like that. I had a great time while I was there. But if I can just give a plug to the Neon Museum,
yes,
a very good friend of mine. She sits on the board there. And as a tourist going into Las Vegas and seeing, all the old movies, and then going to a place where all the old neon signs are actually there in this museum thing. And you go on this bit of a tour, and we went at night, which I assume is when everybody goes. And they've got these LED light type things, or these spotlight things. And what they do is they actually light up all the neon signs, because there's no neon left in them, but they actually have the lights set up so that it hits all the light bulbs, and it lights it all up. And there's this sort of musical thing that goes on. You see all this stuff, and you see Liberace going, and it's just an amazing thing to see. I was so impressed. So for anybody who hasn't gone to Vegas, save a little bit of the gambling money you've put aside and go to the Neon Museum, because personally I thought it was a fantastic thing to see.
Definitely. I appreciate you saying that, Shakeel. Apollo, if you could, tell us some of the other places that folks might not know. Like I said, I know you're ready to move to New Jersey and everything, but if folks are coming to Vegas, what are some of the places that you feel folks should check out that they may not know about? Because I know that there's so many hidden jewels.
Yes, there's lots of hidden jewels here, and I would ever encourage people to come to Las Vegas. My living here for 3 years, it's given me a very good perspective on an anthropological perspective on the city. But there's Red Rock Canyon, for example, which is a natural rock formation. There's also the dam, the Hoover Dam is here. A lot of the people who actually worked on that dam lived on the Nevada side, and you can actually walk through the town where a lot of the people and their descendants lived, who, basically, helped build this dam. What else? I mean, there's Lake Las Vegas. Las Vegas is not just one thing. It is so many things. It's really fun. And even when you go to the casinos and things like that, these things can be pretty fun and spectacular. But what I will always encourage people to understand is to understand your discipline. Understand your own behavior, understand your triggers. If you think that you are not going to be able to handle your alcohol and maintain a budget, then, work on that before you come to Vegas. Because the town is really, the casinos, for example, if you go into a casino, you might not be able to tell if it's night or day, and that's deliberate. They don't have any clocks on the wall. So the thing is that if you don't want to go to the casinos, you can definitely go outside of Vegas to Red Rock. You can definitely go to some of the different, like the Hoover Dam is here. You can definitely get a helicopter tour of the Grand Canyon, because that's actually pretty close here. If you want to just stop through Vegas for a couple of days just to see what the temples of Babylon are all about, then you can go ahead and go down to Sedona, where you can have your more spiritual experience. So Vegas is in its own way has it's a nice little hub for lots of other things in and around the area. And of course, it's not so far from California, like San Francisco and, not San Francisco, San Diego and Los Angeles. And then if you just want to drive north of Vegas to Reno, you're closer to, Lake Tahoe in Northern California. So it's amazing. I think it's really amazing in that way.
Just if I can say to Apollo, everything he said sounds fantastic and perfectly logical. As an international tourist going into Vegas, none of anything that he said is going to happen. If you go to Vegas, you'll have these incredible plans, but you will not do any of them. You'll end up being like me and going, oh, let's go to Circus Circus. Let's go to the big pyramid thing at Caesars. I had great plans. I stayed at the Venetian one night, and I stayed at the Wynn for one night. That one night ended up being a week. I was going to get a helicopter into the Grand Canyon. I ended up at Circus instead. So I can pretty much guarantee you that the first time you get there, have some great plans, but you're not going to do any of them. I can pretty much guarantee that.
Right. I mean, one thing about, since I've moved here, ironically, I picked up yoga and meditation when I was living in South Asia. I didn't really use it until I came to Las Vegas. I actually quit smoking in Las Vegas. So I've gone completely the opposite way when it comes to, what people come to Vegas and do. I've used it as an experience to fortify my discipline. But I mean, the thing is that even though it sounds on one hand that it could be sinister, I would say no. What Vegas really trades off of is your own discipline. If you are able to maintain a budget, and there's lots of food here, so you don't have to gamble, for example. But if you're able to maintain your own sense of self despite all of the things around you, then you will be fine. Sometimes it reminds me of that cartoon Spirited Away. I don't know if you know the cartoon that I'm talking about. I forgot. It's a very famous Japanese anime. And it sort of reminds me of that, because you do see heartbreak here. You will see heartbreak here. You will see people where you will look at them and be like, well, how did you end up here? And then how did you end up where you are? So it's one of these things where you definitely have to keep a sharp eye, sharp ear about you, and use your wits, because there's someone there to take you for a ride if you're open for it. Trust me.
Oh, yeah, definitely. There's a lot of folks that are the con artists and things of that nature. Apollo, I would like to hear from you. Like you said, you've been there for a few years, and you've alluded to some of it, but what were some of the things that surprised you when you moved to Vegas, and what are some of the things that you're looking to do when you go to New Jersey? Because I know you're going to Jersey, and then along those same lines, just of your travels, I would like to hear, because I heard you talk to Sri about your experiences being an African-American when you did visit India, because I know that when I heard a little bit of that conversation, it sounded very fascinating. So I know that's a three-pronged question, and you can take it any way that you want to. And by the way, this is the online dinner party, so we are having and introducing. Jim wanted to remind me, the guests and everything, that we do have the mystery guests. So the first clue is going on the screen right now. And if you're not reading it, I was arrested for violating the segregation laws of my time. So that's one of the clues about our mystery guest that will appear up later. It's probably not who you think it is. I'll just tell you that. But that's the first clue that is going on right now. And we may have an audio clue later on as well. But that's a little bit about our mystery guest that I've got that'll be on this show on a regular basis. We'll have two mystery guests. And by the way, the catch is that you got to get both of them. One is a national figure, meaning that they're somewhere from the United States. It could be in any industry. It could be sport. It could be politics. It could be activism. It could be religion. It depends on where my mind goes at the time. It could also be one international person. And in order to win today, you need to get both the national and the international person correctly. Now, some folks would say, Mark, that's not fair. I got one of them. I didn't get both of them. So what I'm doing is I'm saying that if you get one today, and you just need to tell me this in the chat, and there are various chat aspects, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, or whatever, but it needs to happen between now and 7, because that's the kind of time frame of the show and everything. So it needs to happen during that time. But if you get one today, that means that you are halfway there for next week. So like I said, if you don't get both of them today, I am counting you getting one today in order to get the prize the next week if you don't get both of them today. So I am trying to put a little twist in there. So that's the first clue. And now I'll toss it to you, Apollo.
Well, one of the things that I thought was interesting was when I first got here, I turned on public television to look at news, because a lot of times I don't look at a lot of the cable MSNBC, the shouting matches that they have. I look at, the news hour. But they had just a local news story here. And what I found out was that there's a lot of human trafficking in Las Vegas. And it makes sense because Las Vegas sits right between two different states. It's about a couple of hours north of an international border. And then what I also found out was a lot of people who have been paroled from jail all across the country come to Las Vegas because they find that it's easier to sort of start over. So the motto of Las Vegas is actually the city of second chances. That's what a lot of people don't realize. A lot of people who've been down on their luck in other places come to Las Vegas and they're able to make something of themselves. So that's something that I thought was really surprising about the town. And I mean, the thing is that even though it's a real, win-lose town, there's a lot of heart here in Las Vegas. I mean, but the thing is that, along with that, there's a lot of, people, if people don't feel that you're sincere, then they won't be willing to go out on that limb for you. And so that's something that I think is really interesting. Las Vegas does not have, the state of Nevada does not have a sales tax. And what I found out was that it's a huge offshore banking network, center rather. So just like if you think of the Cayman Islands, or if you think of, Guernsey and Jersey, or the Isle of Man, or the city of London, Nevada right here is a huge offshore banking center. And that was something that surprised me as well.
Shakeel is trying to tell you to keep quiet about that, but we're going to have Shakeel's comments on that as well. And by the way, Shakeel was teasing me because he said that Aussie dinner parties consist of alcohol. I'm talking to some alcohol sponsors and some other folks as well, so don't worry, we will have that element. Maybe it'll be a prize. Maybe they'll have to take their drink elsewhere, but there will be some drinks involved, but we're going to do it in moderation because we don't want them getting caught up in the stuff that Apollo is talking about.
Well, I mean, and
it's a private, not for our viewers, by the way, Mark. But can I say to Apollo, I think, it's very easy. We obviously have casinos here in Australia, and unlike yours, gambling winnings are actually tax-free here, so it's very enticing for a lot of people.
Right.
And a lot of people come up with these great strategies and all of that sort of stuff, and I know it can be very easy to get really caught up in stuff, and that's why I think it's very important that you actually set yourself a limit. Vegas actually has a lot of conferences, and there's a number of conferences to do with the finance world, for example, where I'm coming from, that happen in Vegas. I've got a number of members of my team, probably about 25 of us, I think, that actually were planning a trip over to Vegas this year. Unfortunately, COVID's obviously got in the way of that. There's a lot of conferences that goes on. There's medical conferences. There's all sorts of things that happen. And, I think, look, if you go to Vegas, it's a bit like probably going to Disneyland. I've never been there, but we have similar theme parks here. It's frivolous, it's fun, that sort of thing. Don't take it too seriously, and don't think you're going to win. When you go and play an amusement game at a theme park, and you've got to throw the ball into the bucket or whatever it is, right? And you might win the teddy bear at the end of it, and that you're going to end up spending $50 because you really want to get that ball into that bucket, and you're going to end up winning a $10 teddy bear. It's not about actually winning the teddy bear. It's not about the money. It's just about, right? And that's kind of the thing that I think people should think about Vegas and other places where you can gamble, Macau, other places where you can gamble. Don't get too caught up in it. Have some fun, set yourself a budget, leave your credit card. It's one of the best pieces of advice that I could give, and I don't give advice that often. Leave your credit card in your room, right? Leave your bank cards up there. Just take, the few $100 or the $500 or the $1,000 or whatever it is you're prepared to spend. Take that down. And if you lose, you have to go all the way back up to your room, which is really cool if you're in a different casino altogether. Because you're going to walk back down the strip, up to your hotel, go up the elevator and do the whole thing. And by the time you've done that, you've kind of probably, hopefully, got your mind back in the right frame of mind. But the other thing I was going to say is Apollo, you mentioned something that was very interesting, which is it's a second chance for a lot of people, but you see also a lot of broken hearts and a lot of broken souls there. So I actually drove into Vegas from Jim Eade's home. I went from San Francisco. We were supposed to get into LA, but we might have had a little bit too much fun over in San Francisco, and we decided to drive from there, kind of bypass LA. We went to Claremont, LA, and then drove from there to Vegas. And on the way in there was all these signs, these billboards, and one of them was for a strip club, and it actually said, the class off, whatever year it was, and basically they were advertising that they had, girls there that were like 18 years old. Mm-hmm. And I kind of looked at that and just went, wow, really? Like, I know that in a big country there's going to be, some people, but I couldn't help thinking, that's such a waste. And, how would you feel if you were the parent of one of these girls? Some girls like doing it. I mean, some girls just enjoy it, and that's fine. That's fair enough. But
Right.
you sort of think like, what a waste for them. And you see that, and you see some of the people that work in the casino, and that's kind of become their life. And I think that's sad. So, I try not to support the things that I don't agree with. That's certainly something that I wouldn't agree with. I just, I can't bring myself to go and support that. But as I said, for Vegas, Circus, I was a little bit disappointed, actually. I thought it was going to be so much more fun than it was.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think that there is a bit more of a family atmosphere that Vegas has tried to create. I say that only having been there once, but, they try to create that family atmosphere. They try and create that sort of stuff. The shopping is fantastic. The restaurants, not just within the casinos, but outside the casinos, are a lot of fun.
Right.
And I can't quite remember which casino this was. I think it was, I'm not even going to say, I can't even remember what it was. But there was it's like a cable car thing that goes between the two buildings.
Oh, you're talking about Fremont.
I don't think it was
Fremont Experience.
I don't think it was Fremont. I think it was something else.
Okay, pardon.
But there's also a rooftop bar at that casino.
Was it downtown?
I'm from Australia, so I have no idea where downtown is in Vegas. The whole thing is downtown to me. But, at any point, I went there. I had a great time, and I think I may go down as the only person in history that went to the middle of the desert in Nevada and managed to catch a cold, because we went up to this rooftop restaurant, went out on the rooftop bar. You guys had that blood moon thing going on. Mm-hmm. So I went out to check that out, had a couple of cocktails up there, and managed to catch a cold in Vegas.
Well, I mean, speaking of the blood moon, I mean, Las Vegas, I mean, it's interesting because there is a very interesting spiritual side to Las Vegas. It's against the law to deny someone water in Las Vegas. It is against the law. That is an arrestable offense. And the thing is that because there is all of this lore behind organized crime and people who have been killed here, at night in Las Vegas, sometimes if you just sit down, not on the strip, but if you just like in my apartment complex, for example, it's landscaped. But if you just sit down at night and you look, you don't really know what's shadow and light. It really does have that very spooky aspect to it. And I mean, and that's just one of the aspects of just living in the desert. I think, I've seen it in other deserts I've been in. But it's definitely there's so many layers to this town that it's really quite unfathomable at times. And the thing is that speaking of, I met a young woman here who was actually my supervisor at one of these jobs where I was selling the newspapers, and she told me about how she got caught in one of the hotels, on a prostitution charge. So it is illegal to solicit or to engage in that sort of business. And you never know if there's a sting, because there's a lot of vice police here. A lot of the police here look like anyone else. And then the next thing you know, they turn the lights on and game's over. So you have to just be really aware of that. Now, that's not to say that you cannot come here and hire somebody for their time, normally called an escort. But you have to understand that there is a way about doing it. It's not what you do, it's how you do it.
And one of the things that surprised me about Vegas one of the things that surprised me about Vegas as well was the dust there. I'm just going to be honest. When I visited the friend that I went to visit, I was just blown away by how dusty a place it can be. I know it's in the desert, but I think when you go to visit, you're not thinking about the dust. And it's definitely has some dust elements. It gets into the buildings, and there's folks that even, I'm thinking you in the apartments have to be aware of. The people I was visiting, they were living in the house, but I know they had to be aware of it. But I was just wondering if you could speak about that aspect, because I know it's definitely very hot out there in Vegas, but I also found it to be very dusty.
Well, what I would recommend is that Well, if you come to Vegas and say, because it is dusty, I think in the winter you may get more of the dust because it's more windy, but it's colder as well. But it can be pretty, even to actually the wind blows a lot here. Even today it was rather windy and it's just blowing hot air. It feels like you're in a furnace. But the thing is that there's a lot of dust here, and I would recommend that, say, if you have allergies, just go to a local store here and get some local desert honey, and that will help accumulate you when it comes to your allergies. That's what I did. And that's something that I would definitely recommend. I mean, the thing is that Vegas actually wants people to have a good time. They want people to keep coming back. But, on the other hand, you have to be aware that in certain situations, if you get, like, say, if you get a jaywalking ticket, they will make you pay for it. And that's because it is trying to present itself as a family-friendly environment. So what it is that bourgeois norms are very much in effect. Bourgeois norms, just remember bourgeois norms. So the thing is that, you want to maintain, the expectations and standards of behavior, and then, of course, keep everything else behind closed doors.
That makes a lot of sense, and I can see that advice. I did want to just get away from Vegas for a minute because I know that you had also spent some time in India doing that travels. And as I recall from the show that you were on before, and I know it was a quick interview when you were there with Shri, that you talked about that. And I think that you learned a lot about your experience there when you were in India. But I was just wondering if you talk to us a little bit about the time that you visited India and what you learned about that Asian culture, being an African-American person visiting Asia in whatever context you visited in.
Sure. I've been to South Asia about 3 or 4 times, but the last time I was there, I stayed for a couple of years, and I was living in northern India, New Delhi, and Bangladesh, and Chittagong and Dhaka, which are the port city and the capital city, respectively, of Bangladesh. And so, in Bangladesh, I was teaching. And then in India, when I was there in New Delhi, I was working for an offshore company where I was basically editing investment banking notes for this company. But the company for whom I was editing was here in the West. Now, it's very interesting because when I got to India, people were definitely talking to me, especially like in Bangladesh. People talked about how when Muhammad Ali came to Bangladesh, the Bangladeshis gave him a slice of their beach down in Cox's Bazar. So there's very much this awareness of the freedom struggle of Black Americans in South Asia. On the other hand, however, they themselves have their own colorism. So when I went for the first time, I was living in Gurgaon, which is a suburb north of New Delhi, where they built a lot of these new, what are they called, economic zones. And so I was there working at this company, and I ran out of moisturizer. So I went to the chemist, which is the pharmacy, and asked the man for moisturizer. He thought I was asking for skin bleaching cream. Oh. Now being a Black American, a Black American from South Central Los Angeles, right, where I've lived. I've lived in South Central. I also lived in Watts, which is a very famous neighborhood. It sort of blew me away. I was just like, wait a minute, I'm Black and I'm proud. I'm thinking about James Brown, and I never had my own pride in my own skin color confronted in this way. I didn't even think that people still thought like this. I thought that this was passé. I thought that it had passed away with the 60s and the 70s. And so what I also began to notice a bit more was that there is, I mean, I had a lot of fun in India, definitely. But there is somewhat of a, it's not always a positive experience. For example, if I'm waiting in line at a restaurant, a lot of local Indians will look at my Black skin, disregard me, and jump ahead of me in the line. And then if you object, then, and then once they hear the American accent, then they're like, oh, they sort of correct themselves. But then also I found that, within certain groups, like, it's not all one thing. It's very hard to generalize about a place like India, especially because there are all these cultures and all of these languages and all of these religions and belief systems. So when I was there, I found myself, for the most part, just drinking everything in. Sometimes I would get, experiences that I didn't think were all that great. But then I also had other experiences where people were interested in Black culture. They wanted to learn how to do, urban dance. They wanted to know more about what the experience of being a Black American was like, because there was that admiration for the freedom struggle that we had, because a lot of Indians are aware that we took a lot of the peaceful protest techniques from Mahatma Gandhi. And what you notice is that even in India, there's a great deal of debate even about Mahatma Gandhi and whether or not he was a good person, right? I mean, a lot of people don't realize that one of the first cases that Gandhi won was when he was a young lawyer in South Africa, and they were jailing the Indians with the local Blacks. And he made a legal case saying that because we have this civilization and this religion and X, Y, and Z, we should actually be separated away from the Black South Africans when you imprison us. So so it's very interesting to just see how these things can sometimes turn back on themselves. And what I constantly found myself thinking about was, okay, I've come from a society in America where I am the minority. It's, there's a majoritarian culture there. We've seen it's rife with examples of how my own, humanity of Black Americans has been disregarded. And so then when I go to India, it's interesting because I see there are places where I am affirmed, and then also I see some of the same majoritarian behaviors of rejection. So India was a place where I was able to really understand my own self as an American. So, for example, I grew up in Los Angeles in the 1980s and the 1990s. Now, everybody thinks that the Cold War ended peacefully. That is not true. Black Americans bore the brunt of the end of the Cold War. And we don't really recognize it because we don't really sometimes put it in the context of the Iran-Contra scandal. We don't put it in the context of the Sandinistas and the Contras in Central America. Because when Congress outlawed any further financial support for the, I forget who, for the American side in terms of fighting the communists in Central America, what they did was they took the cocaine and started selling it to Black Americans in inner cities, and that money helped continue to fuel the conflict in Central America. And then, of course, by the end of the 80s, the communism had fallen in Russia, and so then you had more of a concerted effort to try to reconcile communities, break down a lot of these gangs. But the thing was that a lot of families were impacted by that through addiction. They were impacted through the death of relatives. So the hot end of the Cold War happened in American urban areas.
Yeah, that's very true. Shakeel, I was wondering if you could talk about race relations in Australia, and you might have a comment to Apollo as well. But I mean, that's one of the things that's always fascinated me, because I know that there are Aborigines in Australia, but I don't know enough about it to make comments. And you live there, and I don't know what your thoughts are as to how that's impacting, or even how Black Lives Matter is impacting what's going on with the Aborigines and other parts of your culture.
Well, Black Lives Matter has been something that's been protested here in Australia by some groups. But look, we didn't have slavery here, so it's hard for us to really relate to it. I think to the same degree. We do have in this country, unfortunately, an appalling record in how we treat our Indigenous people. We did have at one point in our history, well before my time, we did have a thing called the White Australia policy, where basically what they did was they took the children of Indigenous people and had them adopted into white families, because the view was that this would give them a better chance at life and a better education, that sort of stuff. And we still have a large number of Indigenous families today who don't actually know exactly who their ancestors are, what families they come from. And that's been a problem for us, probably a little bit less so today than what it was maybe 20 years ago. But that's certainly something that I think is a great shame for Australia. There's nobody who's proud of that. More recently, I think there is the issue of whether our police services are perhaps being too forceful, using excessive force and arresting people. And I think the problem with Black Lives Matter movements in Australia, as opposed to what's going on over there, is that they tend to cherry pick times when police are using excessive force against somebody who's perhaps from an Indigenous culture, whilst not acknowledging that perhaps the police services or that police officer may be doing that just as a general thing. And we have seen some cases of that where we just had some bad officers. To Apollo's point about Indians and the colour of skin, it's interesting because even outside of India, if you go to a place like Fiji, which is where a lot of my family are from, it didn't matter whether you were Hindu or Muslim or Christian or what it was. We all just got along, and that was how it was. Now, I'm not actually from Fiji. I was born in Australia, and I'm British as well. But you see the cultures just get along, and some of that may be because they had to. They were all sort of taken by the British, and that I don't think they had much say in the matter. They just were taken, and that was the way it was. And so when they got to a new country, they all kind of blended in and just made it work. Whereas India, less so today, but it still does have the caste system to some degree. And also, my cousins and I always make fun of each other, but we can because we're family and it's loving and it's kind of just joking around. But amongst my cousins, I'm the lightest. There's 7 of us, 6 of us are boys. There's 1 girl. The girl is arguably probably lighter skinned than I am. But amongst my family, I'm one of the lighter skinned amongst us. And when you go to India, for some reason, that's a really big deal. And I can't remember the lady's name, but there was a model or something that had won, before India had won, like the Miss Universe or something along those lines. And she was quite harshly criticised in India because she was too dark. And that's an interesting thing. So I know that a lot of Indians will try to lighten their skin. To me, skin color doesn't matter. Gender doesn't matter. Sexuality doesn't matter. I don't care. I'm not looking at those things, which is why I think when we talk about politics and some of the other shows that we do, I think Australians especially, and people like myself who are immigrants to Australia or are children of immigrants to Australia, it's hard for us to really relate because we're not looking at skin color in the first place. And so when skin color becomes an issue, we kind of look at that and go like, hey. Now, when I grew up in semi-rural Western Australia, which is one of the most remote parts of the world, I think, during the 80s, of course things mattered because I was a little bit different to everybody else. But I can honestly say that I don't think past 10 years of age I've ever felt as I was treated in a racist way in Australia. So hopefully we've made progress there, and certainly I can say for New Zealand, which is another place I spent some time, I honestly can say that I don't think that there is any racism there to any great degree.
Well, but the other thing I will give Australia credit for is at least Australia has been willing to examine its history in a public way. I mean, I think you guys have a day of apology or something like this. Like, that hasn't happened in America.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what you see about our country overseas. We did have a Prime Minister, his name was Kevin Rudd, who apologised to the Aboriginals and the Indigenous. But that was not something that a lot of Australians agreed with. Actually, a lot of Australians were quite unhappy that he did that and had expressed that prior to him doing it. So that was not something that was, universally, sort of celebrated by Australians. Also, we have a day called Australia Day. So that was when Captain Cook came over to Australia and brought his ship of convicts over. And we call that Australia Day. And, some of the Indigenous people will refer to that as Invasion Day. So we do have our own problems here, but they're not perhaps as severe historically as what you have in the United States, because most parts of the old world and the United States have actually had slavery as part of their history. I think we are very lucky as New Zealand, very, very lucky that that's not something that we've actually had to try and deal with, because we never had that happen to us. And even with the convicts that came over here, a lot of them were very poor. They didn't have enough to eat. And they were sent over, especially women, because women, for some reason, tended to commit less crimes than men. Women were sent over here for even more petty crimes than what the men were. They were sent over for stealing a loaf of bread, or stealing an apple or something like that, and so they were shipped across to Australia, because what are the men in Australia going to do? There's no women here. So that was something that did occur throughout our history. But something that a lot of people don't know, I think, in the international community, is that a lot of people in England at the time would actually deliberately commit crimes and then dob themselves in. So they would steal a basket of fruit or something, and then walk up to the police station and say, "Hey, look, I stole this basket of fruit." And the reason they were doing it was because they wanted to come to Australia. And the idea was that, hey, you come to Australia, you do some time, and then you come out, and, we don't have criminal records and all this stuff that's going to prevent you from having a job. So you'd come out, you get a plot of land, you might be able to get a job. And actually, when I was at a very historic place where we've got a prison down in Tasmania, I was actually on a tour there, and they were talking about some of the people there. And actually, one of the wardens off the prison was a former convict. So he was a convict. He spent time in that prison. He came out, became the warden, and ended up becoming the equivalent of the chief of police for that area. So, it gave that person an opportunity that he may not have had otherwise. So, look, as I said, every country, I think, has got an interesting history, and I think we should celebrate the good and acknowledge the bad, but let's not hide away from it, because it's something that we should look at and go, look how far we've come.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you on that. Paula, I was wondering, could you just talk a little bit about also your growing up in Los Angeles and Watts? Because I know a lot of folks that are watching around the world, they don't know necessarily about Watts and that community. I mean, some folks know about it because of its history, because of the Black Panthers, and because definitely way back in the 60s, the fires and things of that nature. And, of course, Rodney King and some things that might have happened out of Watts. But there's a number of other things that are about that community that folks might not know, and that's your home. Like I said, you lived in Vegas now for a few years, but your home is Los Angeles, so, and particularly the Watts area. I just wondered if you could share with our global audience a little bit about Watts, and
Sure.
then I might have you share a little bit about New Jersey, which is where I know you're heading for, and New York. But I would love for you to share a little bit about that as well.
Well, before you do, Apollo, Mark, thanks very much for having me. Apollo, it was lovely to meet you. I'm afraid to our viewers, it is 7:00 in the morning for me, and I'm well and truly past my bedtime. So thanks for being here. Thanks for inviting me. It's lovely to be here. I'll wish you guys good night.
Pleasure to meet you, Shakeel. Be well.
I appreciate that.
So I was born in Los Angeles, and it's actually quite an unfortunate story. My mother fell into addiction, and so as a result, our family was broken up, and we were sent to different homes. And this was just how the state decided to deal with the issue. So my first foster home was actually in a very upper middle class neighborhood called Lafayette Square. And so then I was there until about 8 or 9, and then I was going to be adopted, but the adoption didn't work out. And so as a result, that's how I ended up in Watts. So I never felt that Watts was my home. I never felt that at all. In fact, once I landed there and I saw what it was, I immediately did what I could do to get into a magnet school program so that I could get into a college preparatory program to get to college, because that was the only way that I felt I was going to be able to get out of the neighborhood. Now, the thing is that Watts sits along this thing called the Alameda Corridor. So in the 30s, 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, 60s, and up until the late 70s, it was highly industrialized. Lots of steel mills, lots of lumber yards, and, you have the trains coming from the port of Long Beach and going to the train yards in downtown Los Angeles. And from there, all of the goods that came into Los Angeles are sent out to the rest of the nation. So when I so and but the thing is that Watts, even though it became typically known as a black neighborhood, as was at one time very diverse. So if you were to look at Watts around 1900, you find Italians there, you find people from all over the world there. So when I would walk down the street called Santa Ana, which was actually the old red car streetcar line, used to run down that street. But I would walk past a street called Anzac. And for years, I never knew what Anzac was until I ended up in Istanbul and they told me about Anzac Day. And Anzac is the Australia-New Zealand Armed Corps. And so apparently at some point there were Australians living in Watts. Watts has this famous art installation, public art, and they're called the Watts Towers, and were built by this man named Simon Rodia, who was an Italian. And so, excuse me, they are still there. And it also, when Los Angeles built its, when it started to rebuild its streetcar system, it put 103rd Street, which is sort of the main thoroughfare, the high street of Watts, if you will. They put a station there because historically that's where there always was a streetcar station. So it's a very interesting it has a very interesting history in that at one point it was a place where a lot of immigrants came. They were black people, they were white people, they were Italian immigrants. So it was very diverse, and a lot of that is still recorded in the names of streets and art that's there. But what happened was after I guess when they started to do redlining in the 1930s, it became a neighborhood that was principally, at that point, all Black American. And so what you had was a lot of, just like we see now, a lot of police brutality against a vulnerable minority. And in 1968, that's what the riots were all about. You see this man being beaten, and so then people just erupt. And so then there was the riots. And then that happened across America and other urban areas as well. But then after that, Watts really it did not have any investment for a long time. And so what they started to do was they started to rebuild the what would be called the town center on 103rd. And then my high school is next door to one of the only Black medical schools west of the Mississippi. That's Charles R. Drew University. And they put the university there after they built the hospital, because there was no hospital in Watts. If you got injured, and if you were bleeding, you had to go all the way to East Los Angeles to the General Hospital, which was probably a 20 or 30-minute car ride. I mean, forget an ambulance. And so what happens was people were just bleeding out. So when they decided after the riots in the 60s, they put a hospital there, called it Martin Luther King. And then they installed the medical school there. And then my high school, which is a medical magnet, was built next door, because the idea was that the kids would go to these medical magnets and then they would become doctors. Ironically, even though a lot of kids did go through that program like I did, we did not become doctors, but you do have doctors coming out of the program. My high school is still very well regarded as one of the top high schools in Los Angeles, and it competes regularly with Bravo. So like in my graduating year, I went to Amherst, somebody went to Princeton, a lot of people went to UC Berkeley. So in that way, it's kind of interesting. In that way, even though Watts was, its glory days had passed because it had been deindustrialized, a lot of the neighborhood incomes had fallen. And they built also a lot of these housing projects in the area. And what happened was also you had the arrival of these gangs, and then you had the introduction of the drugs, the drug trade, and then the violence that went along with that. And so the thing is that when I lived there, when I lived there from, I guess, say 1990 to like 1999, you saw a lot of people who were in some ways traumatized by the public policy neglect of the powers that be in Los Angeles and the state of California. But there were always these groundlings of hope. Like, I went to a good high school that got me to a college. I think in Watts, in that neighborhood, only 3% of kids go to college. And how many of them then graduate is probably even a smaller number. So the thing was that Watts has been, it's very much its own, it has its own identity, it has its own history. But on the other hand, it's one of these examples of, even if you go to the north of England, where you once had a vibrant community, but deindustrialization took the spirit out of it. And the thing is that, my foster mother in Watts, she was not a poor woman. She was not a poor woman by any means. She was from Shreveport, Louisiana. She inherited land. She owned half of the streets she lived on, so she rented houses. She owned land in a couple of counties, and she owned land here in Nevada. So I never got the sense of being inferior, because I lived in Watts. And so I thought, I didn't want to live in Watts because I didn't think that it was, it was where I could find opportunity and where I wanted to thrive and all of these other things. But it very much is a very, it's a very interesting slice of LA that has this outsized history for its actual geographical space.
Yeah, it sounds like a very fascinating place. Like I said, I hadn't been to California. That's actually on my wish list. Like I said, I went to Vegas for the first time about a year and a half ago now, since that was not this past New Year's, but the New Year's before. But I've got friends in the entertainment industry, be that film, be that music, be that whatever, that live in Los Angeles. And I keep saying that I'm going to get out there to visit them, but I haven't been to any parts of Los Angeles yet, or any parts of California, even though Jim and me have become friends here on this show. I haven't even been out to San Francisco or a number of the other great places out there. So I just had a friend that just recently moved out to California. So I know that it's on my wish list in the late 50s. So hopefully it'll be before I get to number 60 that I'll get a chance to get out to the West Coast, because there are several places out there, whether that's California, whether that's Oregon, whether that's the state of Washington, not Washington, D.C., but the state of Washington. So, yeah, definitely I've got to do more West Coast travel. I was just curious, Apollo. I was a big fan growing up of the Panthers, the Black Panthers, and I know that you have some views that are also very much politicized and things of that nature. But I was just wondering, what is the view, in your opinion, both of yourself of the Black Panthers, and also what's the perception in what you're hearing of California of the Black Panthers? But I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that, because I'm a fan of some of the work that they did in community building back in the 60s and the 70s. But I know there's the new Black Panthers, but I was just wondering what your perception is.
Well, it's interesting because when, Watts is no longer a primarily Black neighborhood after the Contra, after the Sandinistas, and things like that. A lot of Central Americans have moved in, and a lot of Black Americans moved moved farther inland, like Lancaster and Apple Valley and things like that. But when I was there in Watts, I went to Markham Middle School, which was sort of in the town center of Watts. And I had teachers who were very much part of that era. And I grew up reading books like Richard Wright and Dick Gregory. I grew up reading Baldwin, and this is also alongside books like C.S. Lewis and Jane Austen and Dickens and Tolkien. So I very much had an awareness of myself as a Black American in a hostile environment, right? And then also just being very well aware that I also need to be conversant with that hostility. So the thing was that what I saw was that, by the time I got to Watts in the 1990s, I think there was only a remnant of sort of the community organizing that the Black Panthers had been doing. A lot of the thing is that what they did in Watts, which I thought was atrocious, was the only new thing that they built in Watts was a jail. Was a jail, and they actually put Paris Hilton in it. Oddly enough, but that was the only new thing that they built. The high schools, I mean, I remember hearing stories about, what I thought was most tragic was like, some of the kids that I remember growing up with, their mothers were addicted to crack cocaine, which is still cocaine, but it's created into crack so that they can sell more of it and make more money off of it. That's what people don't understand. And so people have this idea of, looking at it as if it's less than cocaine, and it's not. It's just a different form of it because the people want to make more money off of it. You can make more money off of crack cocaine from one dime bag of cocaine than you can just selling that one dime a bag of cocaine. So the thing is that what they did was, rather than just sort of like really being more empathetic and understanding that, a lot of the people who lived in this neighborhood, it's economically distressed, it's been deindustrialized. There were people like Maxine Waters who like tried to make an effort to get a lot of work, community economic empowerment in the area and things like that. But the thing is that once the Panthers were removed, then you had the introduction of the drug trade, and then you had the gangs. And then once that happened, there was no real social justice in that regard. I mean, that was sort of like, pure laissez-faire capitalism, and people were just being exploited by their addiction. And that actually is pretty unethical, because as we can now understand, addiction is part of a disease. It's always mental health and addiction. And so what happened was these people were basically being exploited. And these were good people. These were not people who were predisposed or had a predilection to, not being very productive members of society. I mean, Jordan Downs, and I believe there was another high school. Jordan was right there on 103rd. And what I understood in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, it was a very good high school. People were going there, and they were, they had bright futures coming out of it. And then all of a sudden, this like a record was scratched, and the 80s came, and then the proliferation of all of these drugs. And then of course, there's the disdain that we sometimes have in our society for people who, fall into addiction. And so what happened was that the whole neighborhood was kind of abandoned. It was abandoned to itself. And so then you had all of these individuals, they're living in these neighborhoods, it's being dominated by these drug gangs, and people were very traumatized. And that's ultimately what happened. And I think, I don't know what it's like now. I haven't been back there, but I found that what did remain, however, were churches. Churches remained. So when I was there, there was this church, Greater Wayside Church of God in Christ. That was where I went and I got trophies for getting good grades. I'd bring my report card and I get a trophy for having these great grades. That was where my encouragement came from. And that was something that was, that's faith-based institutions. That was sort of the last sort of the first and the remaining preserve of any sort of social programming in the neighborhood. So and even then they were pretty much limited in what they could do, just given, the resources that were available from the people that were there. But you had lots of people who were working, who were just trying to make their way, but you had all of these other things that were there. And it was really it was almost as if it was deliberate. And then, of course, what happened after that was you had Pete Wilson, who was a Republican governor in the mid-1990s. He comes up with the 3 strikes laws. And so then, of course, you also get, out of Washington with the Clinton administration and Democrats, passing these very strict, and carceral policies that in the end, what happened was that, and a lot of people got into the system, into the jail system before they were even 18. It started with juvenile hall. And that's where a lot of these kids got a lot of their introduction to gangs. And that's where a lot of these kids got a lot of their awareness of what they thought their society would be. And so that's how, a lot of kids ended up in, gangs. And then once they're in that thing, then one thing leads to another. And then they pass these 3 strikes laws. And then you have people just en masse being sent to jail. And then, you have a bunch of people coming out. They don't have their civil rights because they're felons. They don't have any skills because they were in jails, and jails are not universities. And so what are they left with? And so that was one of the things that I thought really brought home to me about Watts, was just when your public servants do not care, when they do not care, people literally, spiritually, and physically die.
Yeah, you got a good point about that and everything. And I was just wondering what your thoughts are about the politicization of our political people, because I know a lot of folks are thinking about Kamala and some of the things that she did in California. And then, of course, we've got on the opposite side, the RNC and the Republicans talking about the HBCUs and how great a job they've done with the HBCUs. But as just a citizen, and but also I would consider you Apollo, and it's from what I've seen you engaged in conversations, whether that's with Sri or other folks online. You are definitely what I would consider definitely an activist type person. So I was just wondering if you could talk about your views about how the African American vote is being politicized to some degree or another, and is maybe even being used by both sides. But I want to know what your perception is.
I have strong opinions. I am not an activist. You will never catch me at a parade, because when I was living at Watts or protest, I knew then that the police had the power to take a picture of you and to identify you. So I have always been more to get a letter writing campaign going than actually putting myself out on the streets. Because what I then notice is that when you go to protest and you happen to be a young Black man, people will call you an activist. And for some people, that is a threatening title. So I do not describe myself as such. I'm a citizen of the United States who writes letters. And the thing is that when it comes to the comprehension of, say, Kamala Harris working in California as a prosecutor, a lot of that architecture was not put there by her. She had to work within it. And I think that she definitely made an effort to try to improve what was already a structure that was in place. But none of those things can be really changed until the majoritarian society decides they change. And the thing is that what I find is, people want to say, they want to say they've done X, Y, and Z for HBCUs. Well, and that's all fine and good. But what are you doing to enable individuals to have a holistic experience, a holistic personality, a holistic interest in society? Like, it was only until I got to Las Vegas that I found out I could have gotten an insurance license at 18 if I would have passed the exam, and I could have been making money selling insurance policies. That would have made me a lot richer 10 years later at the age of 28 than going to college and doing all of these other things. So the thing is that there are certainly a lot of things that are here in America that can lift people out of poverty. The problem is that we're not doing a very good job of explaining it to people. How many kids would actually be saved? I remember telling the kids in Watts, you have a record in the society. You need to be careful because you don't want anything on your record. And they completely didn't believe me. I mean, and I think, why not get people to understand that, yes, you do live in a society. It is governed by laws and information systems, and that you want to be able to use it to your advantage. But the problem that I find is that a lot of people are far too quickly disillusioned at a very early age. And I think one of the things that Kamala tried to do was to try to challenge that disillusion. And I think that's probably more important than anything.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree with you. One of the things that the folks that founded IBM TV talk about is exactly what you just said. They talk about financial literacy and us understanding the financial aspects of everything, but also serving the underserved. And I know that one of our founders, Kim Calhoun, oftentimes talks about that she isn't necessarily opposed to Black Lives Matter, but she would like to see us actually have a plan of action, which is what I think even you're kind of alluded to as well. That it's all right to do all the marching and the protest and the whatever that you're going to do in this concept, but also how are you going to bring it to a plan of action? And I think that that's been an issue through a number of decades. Like I said, I'm in my late 50s. My dad is 80, so he was actually involved in the civil rights struggle in the 60s, as was my mom and a number of others. So I would agree that sometimes we need an actual game plan.
Let me give you an idea, okay? If you have, all right, let me just give you an idea. As someone who holds an insurance license, right, I can file a complaint with an insurance commissioner, okay? If you had a whole group of people who at the age of 18 sat down, took the exam, and got insurance licenses, and then wrote to the commissioner, I believe that these police practices are perils, you don't think someone's going to step in? We have to remember, in South Carolina, when they had a huge hurricane barreling down on it, You did not have the governor on TV. You did not have the mayor on TV. You had the insurance commissioner on TV. And I try to get people to understand that if you were to look at the sky at night, all of those stars are the banks. All of that black is the insurance.
Yeah, and I think a lot of folks don't understand that is the importance of the insurance industry. And you're right, they did have the insurance commissioner and things along those lines, because you're absolutely right about that. And by the way, I also have to commend you, but I want to come back to the discussion around activism. Well, not even activism, because I agree that that is sometimes a misused word and everything. But I must commend you on one thing that you do on a regular basis. I also am a member of the transportation party, in the sense of being part of mass transit. I've only had one car in my life, and that was actually with a a provisional type license. So I was actually technically not even supposed to be driving with that car, but I have only had one car in my life, and the rest of the time I've gotten around Durham. And Durham is also, and around the Triangle is also very much of it has its limitations around transportation. So it's not easy to get to parts of North Carolina, but I do get around using the buses and mass transit and things of that nature. So there are other parts that I would like them to do a better job of, and I'm sure there are even parts of Las Vegas and Nevada that you would like them to do a better job of, and the same with New Jersey, New York, where you're about to go to. But I am a big fan of mass transit, and I think that it serves a great component, even in terms of our economical development and our growth of communities. So I just wanted to commend you for being part of the bus club.
Well, the thing is that we have to remember that our streetcar system came as a positive externality from our railroads. So when you had the Southern Pacific go into California, and then they had all of this land that they owned, and they wanted people to buy houses in that land, then they built streetcars in order to get people to those plots of houses in order to, service these neighborhoods. So I don't think we're really going to have a very strong and robust public transportation system in any meaningful way until we get our railroad system, our passenger railroad system in hand. And I think we should just go ahead and just go full on, high-speed rail. Because then what happens is that you'll have a lot of economic benefits that come out of that. And that's what people forget to realize. I mean, a lot of times we talk about the Vanderbilts and the Stanfords and the Crockers and how they basically were robber barons. But it does take sometimes those types of personalities to make something that big happen, right? But on the other hand, we don't really recognize that in doing so, they were also the impetus behind a lot of mass transit. And so a lot of people thought the car was more democratic. But what we find is that even though the car may be more democratic in the hands of millions and millions of people, it's certainly a lot more destructive to our environment. But I mean, I always encourage people to find those ways where they can find influence. A protest is great. It gets people out on the street. You get your voices heard. But no, trust me, every police department cares if an insurance commissioner says, well, your policies are actually causing this problem, and so therefore we're going to raise your rates.
Yeah, that's very true. I don't know whether you've thought about it, but Apollo, as I'm hearing you talk and things of that nature, I know you're going to move to New Jersey and New York and everything. But I personally, and I haven't done some campaign work, but I've got friends that have worked in those campaigns. So I'm lobbying that you become an insurance commissioner of either New Jersey or New York. So you game for that job?
Well, the thing is that my licenses are expiring. I'm very much a man of international affairs, so I do want to go back to the multilateral scene. I think that that's just where my heart is. I think that, it was good to, have the experience living in the United States domestically and understanding how things work. But I've always been international. Even when I was I had this great teacher. I went to Ritter Elementary in Watts. And, she was the one who started reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis and completely took my imagination. And then I became an avid reader after that. But what she also did was she gave me an atlas of the world. And so I was just like, I just want to go see the world. So for me, I've never, I think that's why I think that we should be interested in cultivating every individual, because you will have that person that does want to become the insurance commissioner. And then you'll have someone that wants to go off and do something else. Because I think that, where we are right now in the United States, for example, Black Americans have a much bigger leg up than some of the poor people in West Africa, where they can't get an identification card because there's no land registry, or they can't really. So, I mean, there are other parts of the world that have a much more rudimentary problems. And the other issue is that I think that, I'm because I'm one of these international individuals, I look at the world very much like the game of Risk. And so my thing right now is that I'd be much more interested in getting the United States into the Commonwealth than anything else. Because there even Black Americans, even with our disposable income, and I'll explain it to you this way. The United States has 325 million people. Our economy is $20 to $25 trillion. That means each American citizen, all 325 of us, each individual citizen is worth $80,000. In the Commonwealth, where you have English-speaking legislatures, and you have the common law, you have similar schooling, because you have to remember, Kamala Harris's father is from Jamaica, Commonwealth country. Barack Obama's father was from Kenya, Commonwealth country. How is it that these individuals can come from these countries and automatically sort of slot themselves into a certain position within our system and be very successful about it? That's a question. So the thing is that what I think is that if the United States joins the Commonwealth, then Black Americans will get a vector of their own identities that they don't get now. They'll get access to different societies like Ghana or Nigeria or South Africa or Jamaica or Belize or even India if they want, or even Fiji or Australia or Canada. And what it does is that it closes the historical loop. Now, the thing is that in the Commonwealth, there are 2.2 billion people. And right now it has a GDP of $14 trillion. You divide the 2.2 billion into the 14 trillion, and each Commonwealth citizen is worth about $800. Now, taking the example of the United States as one of Britain's most successful colonies, right? If the Commonwealth developed to the degree where each of its citizens is worth $80,000, that's over 2.2 billion people, can you understand how much money you would get on your return if you invested?
Wow, that's interesting, because I know I had another guest on one of my other shows, and they were talking about being a big fan, and I don't know how you feel about this particular idea of the whole notion of reparations for African Americans and things of that nature. But what you're arguing is almost like reparations for the entire United States, but I guess we get the reparations out of like the colonial powers because.
Well, I think what I'm trying to say is that if you give people the space for economic opportunity, why do we need to talk about reparations? The only reason why we're talking about reparations is because people are not being allowed the economic opportunity to thrive. And the thing is that a lot of the dominant group keeps thinking, and their behavior and their policies keep reflecting not the idea of capitalism, but it's very feudalist. It's very feudalist, and it's very much a planter's mindset. They think that allowing more and more Black people greater and greater incomes is going to take something from them. That's a very mercantilist idea. There's only a certain amount of gold in the world. Capitalism has never been about that. Capitalism has always been about expansion. So if we were to create other vectors where Black Americans can put their money and invest, and we already know that these countries have common law legal systems. We already know that they have similar education systems. If we could take our money and invest it outside of the United States, then why do we need to talk to them about anything? They can sit up there and keep their mercantilist ideas, even though they're operating within a capitalist structure. We can let them keep that. Okay, you can keep that. We're going to go do something else. And the thing is that there's just a lot of opportunity there. I think that's one of the main reasons why Britain broke out of the EU. They see it themselves.
Interesting you say that. What are your views on, and I know it was popular, I guess, in the 60s and the 70s, but I'm just curious, what's your views on Pan-Africanism? Because would that be another union that we could join? Or do you think that we don't even need to go there in terms of like the whole notion of us being more supportive of the rest of the Caribbean nations and the rest of Africa and things of that nature. So I don't know what your views are on Pan-Africanism, and I'm not even sure how popular it is in the world now, but I was wondering what your thoughts are on
No,
that.
I grew up in LA going to the Pan-African Film Festival. I love Pan-Africanism. But the thing is that I'm trying to get people to understand nuts and bolts here. There are real events happening. So let me give you an idea. It was only until 2013 that Elizabeth II signed the Charter for the Commonwealth. That means when she came to the throne in 1952 or 53, whenever it was, she has been issuing a declaration practically almost every 10 years. And all of these declarations pretty much said we're going to have human rights, we're going to have democracy, we're going to be capitalist. We're not going to do any of the things that the old empire did, right? And so the thing is that all of this was distilled into the Commonwealth Charter of 2013. And then when we had Charles become voted in as the next head of the Commonwealth, this also happened at the same time that there was the Windrush scandal in Britain, where after the war, they invited all of these Caribbean people to come and help rebuild England. And then they turned around and said, well, get out because you don't have any documents. The reason why I'm only focusing on the Commonwealth part of it is because with Pan-Africanism, it's everything. You've got Portuguese speakers, you've got the French speakers, you've got the Arabic speakers, and so there's no real central focus for anything. But for Black Americans, I think if we really want to get a handle on our own economic development and our own resource in a way of being able to generate independent income streams outside of America, then if America joins the Commonwealth, and then we start investing in companies that go over to develop the Commonwealth, then I think that's where we can actually get a lot of money. So in a way, it's not like we're colonizing. We're not coming from the colonial mindset. We're actually coming from the international development mindset. And we already have a lot of the cultural influence. We already have a lot of the skills. We already know how to build institutions because look at what we've done here. And so I think that it would be good for us. I mean, we have to remember when the Commonwealth puts out all of these declarations, they're pulling a page out of America's playbook. We had the Declaration of Independence, and then we had the Articles of Confederation, and then we had the Constitution as the ultimate charter of the United States. And so that's basically what this queen has been doing. And I think that because I think in a real way, I don't know why she would be doing it, but if you look at the establishment of the empire, right, under Elizabeth I, she started the London Company, she started the Royal African Company, and she started the British East India Company. And there's a great book that I would encourage everyone to read. It's called John Dee and the Empire of Angels. And the reason why I would suggest you read it is because John Dee was Elizabeth's astrologer, her magician, basically. And he was the first 007. And the thing is that he's also the inspiration for Gandalf. And he had some kind of interesting system where he was able to communicate with intelligences beyond our own reality. And he was the one that came up with the name British Empire. And the book supposedly is lost, but within that book, these entities told John Dee which countries to go and take over in order to create this empire. And they were very successful at doing it. It's a very messy affair, that's true. But the thing is that I think that this is just something that we have to keep in mind because it's still here. The Commonwealth didn't leave. The empire just got converted into the Commonwealth. And I think that for a lot of Black Americans, because there are a lot of African countries there, because there is the Caribbean there, I think it would be a good idea to start having these conversations with people in Ghana, in Nigeria, in South Africa, about how our skills and expertise can come and help and build their economies or vice versa. So, I mean, Pan-Africanism is great. But the thing is that when you look at Pan-Africanism as a whole, it's harder to get everybody on one page. But if you just start with the Commonwealth, the Commonwealth countries in Africa, then it's much easier to focus on things like economic development, social and political development. And you already have the forum there. All we have to do is join it, the United States, that is. And then the thing is that what it also does is that when it closes that loop in history, because a lot of times a lot of Americans do not count their royal past. They do not remember that 1603 is the beginning of this country, not 1776. It's Virginia. Virginia was started with Newfoundland and Bermuda. Even to this day, Bermuda is one of the biggest reinsurance centers in the world for shipping and things like that. And the Royal African Company, interestingly enough, was started by Elizabeth I, and that was to deliberately bring Africans over to America. Slavery was not, when you look at the beginning of it, slavery was not a foregone conclusion. That was something that later on developed after the colonies were established and people realized if we can create the economies of scale by not paying people and just getting these people to produce a lot of agricultural products that we can sell across the sea back to England, then that's how we can make money. But I don't think there was, as far as I know, I don't think there was a specific instruction to enslave Africans. It was something that happened in the construction of the empire. And it's something that, and then of course there was the British East India Company, which later on did what it did, which was create the Indian Empire for the crown. But the thing is that what people don't realize is that the British Empire was it was territorial, that's for sure. But what it mainly was an empire of opinion. The British, even though they came and took over your land and told you what to do, they still wanted your good opinion, which is kind of ironic. But that's why the Commonwealth was able to convert. So that's why the empire was so easily able to convert into the Commonwealth afterwards, because people still had a good opinion. And the thing also is that what we don't realize is that when we look at Charles II, the King, Charles II, Charles wanted to be an economic regulator. Well, this is 1640. What was he really trying to regulate? The African slave trade. And the king was not interested in having Africans being taken wholesale across the sea as they were, because if you kill a chief who is a prince, then what does that mean for him? And what did they sell him anyway? They said, we don't care. We'll chop your head off too, which is what they did. So that creates a very interesting connection between Black Africans and the crown that people are little aware of. They don't realize that when the crown lost its ability, or lost the right to rule, was also the same time slavery took off in America.
Yeah, that's very true. That was around the time that slavery came and everything of that nature. I'm actually seeing that Ben Coates is one of our IBM TV folks and is definitely from London, can join in our conversation. So I just sent him a note and we'll see whether he joins or not, because I know that sometimes Nick Palvedo, one of our founders, teases him about the colonial aspects of England and France and other places. But you bring up some very valid points about us becoming part of the Commonwealth and how that could work and the things of that nature. Just real quickly, if you could share a little bit also about your background with New York and New Jersey, because like I said, I know that you told me that you had lived in New York in the past and that you're getting ready to move to New Jersey. So I would love to have our world audience know a little bit about your thoughts about New York and New Jersey, both in the past and in the present. And of course, I know our listeners would like to know how you, as one in Vegas, now about to be in New Jersey, is surviving COVID, because we do have a global audience. So I'll start with the New York, New Jersey, and come to some of your own concerns around what's going on with the COVID crisis. But just talk to me a little bit about your background with New York and New Jersey.
Sure. So I ended up on the East Coast actually by happenstance, and it was almost sort of mystical, because my high school is named after Martin Luther King Jr. and Charles R. Drew. Now, a lot of people don't realize Charles R. Drew saved millions of lives during the Second World War, because he was the man who came up with the ability to create blood transfusions, both with the blood and the plasma. He figured that out. And he was a black man from, I think, the Carolinas, actually.
Yes.
Now, the thing is that when he was in an accident and he later on died, they denied him a blood transfusion because they thought white blood and black blood was different, which is, of course, not true at all. But that's just racism. So my high school is named after Charles Drew. I went to this, and that's next door to a black medical school called Charles Drew. So when in 1996, when they got rid of affirmative action in the UC system in California, I saw that as, well, I'm not going to go to UCLA, UC Berkeley, or UC Davis, which were the three schools I applied to. The three schools I was admitted to, I said I was not going to go there because I felt that indicated a hostility that I didn't want to have to deal with. So what happened was I applied to several schools, and the school that gave me the best, that paid the majority of my costs for tuition and everything, that was Amherst College. And so once I went to Amherst College, most of my friends dropped down to New York. I thought I was going to be a corporate lawyer. So then I went and I joined this white shoe law firm, but then later on decided I didn't want to do that. Then I thought I was going to be a journalist. So then I decided to go ahead and attend Columbia University, which was founded by George II. And so once there, I became more and more interested in international affairs and multilateral organizations. So I thought I was going to be a journalist first. So I started off in financial journalism, writing for Institutional Investor, and didn't last very long there. And so then what I did was I went abroad and found myself editing some investment banking notes in India. And then I figured, oh, well, why not just go into communications? And so I then got a contract with the African Development Bank doing their communications. And then I got another one here in Washington doing it for the World Bank. And since then, I have been, really sort of plodding my way along because I'm a strange bird. People see my resume and it's like, wow, this is a great resume. Now, what do we do with you? And there wasn't anything really there because it's, quite ivory tower. But and that's basically how I ended up on the East Coast. Now, as I said, I never learned to drive because of the pollution in Los Angeles, but I moved to the East Coast because I just felt my spirit was there. And I was a history major. And so a lot of the history is there on the East Coast. And that's how I ended up there.
Okay. And you said you're about in the process to move back there. What's pulling you back to the New Jersey area? Like I said, I know that you're definitely trying to make that move. And are you hoping to be there at the end of the year, or are you hoping to be there by September or October?
Well, I'm actually trying to leave within the next few days. I mean, hopefully by next week I'll be in New Jersey. So that's part of the stress because of the tight time frame. But the other thing is that I transferred my job to New Jersey because I find that I am no longer needed here. I am no longer of service. And the only reason why I moved to Las Vegas was to help someone. I'm also a mental health advocate. I'm a contributor with the Mental Health Innovations Network out of London. And so the thing is that I would not ever pick to live in a place like Las Vegas because it is a city that has so many addictions. Just getting off of the airplane, there's gambling. So I wanted to, that's why I'm leaving. I feel like my time here is done and I need to move on with my life. And I feel like it'll be a new beginning back in New Jersey. But the thing is that with COVID, I believe, I'm not sure what the numbers here are in Nevada, but people do seem to be good about wearing masks. I haven't seen any of the stories that you see in other places about people, beating each other up because they're being asked to wear masks. So I haven't seen that, but the numbers have been rising here. But I think they're sort of trending downwards. But I mean, this is also Trump country as well. I mean, I rode to work every day with a Trump supporter. Wow, I don't know what I was about, but still, I did it. And it was good to just hear their perspective. And what we have to realize is that underneath a lot of these Trump supporters are a lot of white people who are economically hurt. And they are trying to make sense of why their leadership abandoned them. And so what happened was Trump came along and said, well, with all of his racist rhetoric, giving them that sense of comfort and restoring that sense of their place in the world. Because what they did after the 2008 crisis was, again, they let people hang out to dry. I mean, they got rid of federal unemployment benefits, for example. They only had state-level unemployment benefits. And I remember those years. They were lean years. And so now you've got an even worse of an economic collapse with this whole COVID thing. And so a lot of times people are just trying to revert to their tribal clan in order to find some kind of, comfort in the environment in which they find themselves. But they don't really understand that the individuals that are manipulating their psychology and their emotions, these are people that are just using them as, votes, and they don't really care anything about them. So they should actually be looking at Biden and looking at other elected officials who have their economic interests in alignment. But the other thing is that a lot of people, that's a mental Rubicon that a lot of people don't think they can cross, because, a lot of them really do have an emotional and self-esteem investment in their white identity. And then you have, when you see like the Candace Owens of that group, these are people who are just trying to, surf on that resentment and try to get all of the benefit that they can. But I don't think that those individuals are really serious, because when the tide turns, they'll turn right along with it. So, that's kind of how I view those people. But I mean, yeah. And yeah. So, but I'm heading back to Jersey. And then I think hopefully in a year, I'll be back in Washington doing something in communications. I want to go back to communications. That's where I feel I belong.
Gotcha. So you're hoping to go to Washington, D.C., not the state of Washington, but you're hoping to make your way back to Washington, D.C., if I'm hearing you correctly and everything.
Yes. It is a manageable city for a pedestrian. So
no, there's no doubt that DC is definitely manageable for a pedestrian. There's no doubt about that. And I know that you've got, I used to have one many moons ago, but I know that you've got a cat. So if you're taking the cat with you, DC is probably a manageable city for cats as well. So I know that's one of your loves. So I don't know if the cat's going with you.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to be able to take the cat. I mean, I was talking to one person about one place in New Jersey that was no pet, but then I spoke to someone else who does have a pet. So that could change things. So it's rather fluid, but I think I will just give the cat back to the person who gave it to me. And that'll be a sad goodbye. And then, my time in Vegas will be done.
I understand your time in Vegas will be done. But you mentioned one thing earlier in our conversation that really surprised me. And I'd like you to just maybe elaborate a little bit more about that, because I don't think that people think about the fact of the homeless that are in Vegas. And I know that when I was there, I was shocked by some folks that probably were in that homeless population. I know we've got it here in Durham, North Carolina, and other parts of North Carolina as well. And of course, it's a global issue. But could you just share a little bit about what you've learned about the homeless population there in Vegas? Because I do think that a lot of times, whenever we think of the big tourism kind of cities, whether that's Vegas, whether that's Orlando, Florida, whether that's Miami, whether that's wherever, we don't think about the folks that are underneath out on the outlines of society. But they are there. We don't think about them or talk about them.
Well, I mean, just, when I first arrived here in Vegas, I actually lived right behind the MGM. And there's this vast field right across the way. And there were lots of people living in that field. They were living in tents. It was just probably an open air drug market. It was just, I think one morning I was walking down my driveway and I heard this man screaming, "That's my woman. That's my woman." Well, my ears perked up because I'm like, well, a woman is not a possession. How is she your woman? So then I walked down to where this man was yelling and screaming. And then I take a peek over the wall. And then there he is with a knife. And I'm just like, wait a minute. Are they trading women for drugs? What's going on here? It was like awful. So that field has since been cleaned up. This is one of the instances when I needed the police department. So I had them step up their patrols. They started going through the field, started clearing the people out. And what I recognized for the first time in my life living in Las Vegas, because there's supposedly rumored to be a large homeless area under the city in the pipes and the sewers in this place. There's supposedly a whole, community, city even under the city of Las Vegas in the storm drains. And what I realized is that because a lot of those homeless are also veterans, the homeless are extraordinary cases of trauma. These are individuals who have been so deeply traumatized by their experience that they have completely checked out of habitation. They don't want to, they don't want to deal with any of the social norms that go with habitation. And that's really what it seems to me, is that these are people who have been traumatized. You know, if they've been in the military, they have a trauma. And then when they fall into homelessness, they fall into more trauma. And then if they fall into drug abuse, because we don't really have a very easy to access mental health service in this country, and then what happens is you get people who are going for the most efficient thing, which are, you know, the street drugs, and then they may find themselves having an abusive experience while their mind is on a substance that deepens the impact of that trauma. And so what you then have are individuals who are so deeply traumatized. It's almost like looking at someone who has been, you know, if you were to look at yourself as a full-size person, their lives have been so traumatic that they have become so small that they don't even see themselves as existing as part of the society. So even though we see them, they don't see themselves as part of our society. They don't even see them. They may not necessarily even see themselves as a person. You know, they may even only just see themselves within their trauma. And that is something that I realize homelessness is related a lot of times to mental health, because we have not had a good handle on our mental health, because our whole hospital system is so Byzantine. Then what happens is you have these people who are traumatized, and that's how they build their community. And I see them as individuals of great sympathy. But the problem is that you need people with specific skills and training to interface with the homeless population, because these people have been so traumatized, because they have been living in a world with different social norms and different signals for social behavior, that you would have to really understand that in order to try to draw them out of that and to bring them back into society. Now, the question is, how do we do that? We don't know what suicide prevention looks like, A. B, we don't know how do we deal with trauma? We don't know how to untraumatize someone. The Dutch have an idea. The Dutch believe, or they have been testing rather, the use of MDMA. So when their soldiers were coming back from Iraq and they were PTSD and they had traumatized, they set up a therapeutic environment where they would administer MDMA so that the individual could reconnect their emotions to their actual consciousness. Because a lot of times those things become compartmentalized in order to create a holistic internal sense of self. So in America, I mean, how are we even going to begin to have the conversation if we can't even discuss drugs?
Yeah, but I know that's one of the reasons I invited, and I'm still wanting to hear from Ben, but I also invited Jeff Eichen to come into the conversation. He's been doing a lot of work around, there's a number of people that are in jails because they have done what folks would consider nonviolent crime, whether that's marijuana or whatever, and they're in those jails. And he's actually been an advocate of getting them out of jails, and has freed a few folks already, and has got some more that he's working on getting out of the prison system. So he has a show here called Weed Wednesday. So he was actually, I think he was on right before me, if I remember correctly. So he was on right before me, and that's his showtime and everything. So he is part of the IBM.TV family, and is definitely involved in trying to free a lot of these prisoners that are involved in the prisons that are in there for nonviolent crimes. And you've actually alluded to that a few times, even in the work that you're doing, Apollo. By the way, Apollo is in the process of moving, so he's a little bit frazzled by the move, so that's why he's not on the screen and everything, Jeff, but he's definitely been giving us some great conversation and some real good insight. He is a young African-American person in that whole, I guess, millennial Gen Z kind of age range, but if you hear him talk, you would think that you were talking to a much older and much wiser man, because I remember when I was young like him, they used to call me an old soul, and that's the kind of feeling that I'm getting from Apollo, is that he's got that old soul thing going on. So I just wanted to bring you in, and if you talk to him a little bit about the work you've been doing with the prisoners.
Hey, Apollo, how's it going?
Well, how do you do, Jeff?
I'm doing fine. My show today was about jury nullification, and that's something that you have the option to not persuade, but to have a jury that knows how to not let you go to jail for life for anything or for nonviolence. And it's outlawed in some states and in some jurisdictions. And so the idea is to balance all the budgets between the sexes, the colors, and the nonviolence and the plant medicine, because I know that that Colorado and Oakland, California have legalized mushrooms. So I believe that when I met Dr. Machulam from Israel, who found the THC molecule, and he's 86 years old, and at a Colorado weed conference at the university where they're studying weed in America here, is that they have found a receptor for PTSD that marijuana or CBA or CBG or CBD assists with, that goes directly there. And, if you take opiates versus marijuana or THC or the plant, okay, because we need to be prescribed properly for what we have, and that's one of my bugaboos here is that everyone just goes for the plant, and we need to extract the CBG, the CBA, the CBD, so we can find what Dr. Machulam and the people that have been linking PTSD solutions to the plant, to the cannabis plant. And so I've heard that there are links to that, and I'm really proud and amazed. And I'm also a proponent for relegalizing, microdosing, the psychedelic world, because I have many people, many friends that are trying to forage the ibogaine, solution for withdrawals from heroin. And it's the gentle way to do that, as opposed to the opiate standard, which is killing people and is addictive.
Right. I mean, the thing is that, firstly, nonviolent, what I suspect, I haven't seen any study or anything academic on it, but what I suspect is that a lot of the nonviolent offenders are people who are self-medicating. And this is
3 strikes. It's a 3 strikes rule that I'm fighting for. These people are 3 strikers, and they're going away for life, and it's not even rape or murder.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm trying to indicate. What I'm saying is that the individuals who have been caught up in this 3 strikes thing, right, should not have been there in the first place. These are people who are self-medicating, and so therefore they should be under a doctor's supervision. That should be under HIPAA or private health information. And the thing is that unless you know to say that, right, when you're being confronted by an authority, then they'll just think that you're somehow doing this for joyriding or something like this, when that's not the case at all. A lot of times people are doing this because they don't have entree to any real mental health professional. And then on top of it, we don't even discuss how long it takes to even figure out your own mental health. Because if for example, if you find yourself self-medicating and say you want to go and go to a psychiatrist and then, start that whole thing, that takes years to figure out as well. It takes years of trying different medications, different therapies, different combinations of therapies in order to figure out what will work for you.
My family members never got it right, because the Zoloft and the Xanten, all of the well, your anxiety be taken care of, try this, and let's up your dose or let's down your dose, and it puts everybody sideways. And my uncle committed suicide because his doctor went away on a golf trip for 3 weeks and he wasn't supervised.
Right, and that's the issue. That's why I belong. That's why I joined, and you should do it as well. You should join the mental health innovations as a contributor. Because the thing is that we are just now coming into a real comprehension of mental health and its complexity. Now, the thing is that we probably were a lot farther along before Ronald Reagan shut down the hospitals, right? Then made it much harder. But I kind of feel like what happened was people who are mentally ill are people who have a mental health issue are the most vulnerable in our society, because they're not often aware that they are being caught up in something that could eventually harm them. So, For example, like, if you happen to, not be fully present, right? Because you're trying to manage a mood disorder, how attendant are you going to be if you happen to catch a case because you were self-medicating with marijuana? You're trying to work, you're more worried about preventing the worst, which is your suicide, than you are actually anything to do with what's happening with the law. So I kind of feel like what's happened is a lot of people with mental health issues have been the trade-off. So fine, we got rid of segregation. We can't just, do black people like this anymore. But there's another group of people that we can do like this. And these happen to be the people
we're also in a poisoned state with we're getting the benefits of right now with emotional people that are being caught by glyphosate and by all of the pesticides that we've had on the planet are catching up to us, and babies are being born not able to have the chance that you and I are. And
right.
So they don't even get to develop to be 20.
Right. Well, I mean, but just to get back to what I was saying, politically, I think that people who have mental health issues have been the trade-off in that with law enforcement, they were saying, okay, well, we can't just target people of color like this because this is illegal. This causes all sorts of things, even though it still happens, right? The people who we find mainly being arrested and abused by law enforcement are people with mental health issues, the homeless, for example. So the thing is that, until we begin to recognize that it is not acceptable to manipulate someone with a mental health condition, to play with their triggers in order to get them to, have an episode, until we make that illegal, we can't really begin the conversation.
Right. Well, it's accountability.
Right. Exactly. And the thing is that what the police will say is that, well, we are not accountable for your emotional responses, but you are accountable for provoking that emotional response. And that's what they don't want to deal with. And that's what we find ourselves with now. Is someone accountable for provoking an emotional response?
Well, you speak the truth, and I appreciate you. The Dalai Lama approach is compassion,
Right. But the problem with that, the thing is that we also have to talk about the bias in criminology. Mental health has a sinister bias in criminology. If you say you have a mental health issue, everybody thinks, oh my God, serial killer, Ted Bundy. They don't think you're the person who can be easily influenced by a confidence con artist. They don't see you as the person being vulnerable, the person who could be potentially victimized.
Well, forever, I agree with you. Forever, it's been an issue of what to do with our populace that is addicted to going to jail or that is compromised by having mental issues. How do we gently create spaces that are not full of electricity or harm, and there's jerks in there that are treating them improperly? How do we steward that and change the whole paradigm?
Well, I think
it's a big one.
Well, I think firstly,
education is it. Education.
Well, we have
this show is it. Marc, you're doing great.
Right. Education is key. Yeah. Education is key. But the thing is that we have to first acknowledge that people who have a mental health issue should be protected. They should not be thought of as targeted.
No, they should be held like a baby because a 40-year-old.
No, I disagree. These are individuals who can also have agency, who can also produce and create things. You don't want to infantilize someone or pathologize them.
No, I'm not talking about that, but the ones that are questioning themselves and that can't be in society need to be protected also, not just be locked and thrown away. Yeah.
Right. But then the thing is that what does a program look like for them, right? Is it Is it? I mean, what does that look like? You know. So I
Well,
mean,
that's why Jack Nicholson did One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. You know, Nurse Ratched. We have to understand that the prison system and our system for the the people that are mentally ill is old school. It's got to be brought up to Gandhi status to treat everybody with care.
Yeah, Jeff, I don't want to jump in and everything. So I guess the question being raised, and I'd like to hear Apollo's view on this and everything, is the prisons and everything, how can they address mental health? I mean, should we just release all of those who've got the mental health and the homeless issues out of the prisons, or is there ways that we can address it in a more 21st century kind of view? And I also want you to talk about the police force as well, because I do know that a number of them are not geared to deal with folks that are homeless, mentally ill, or whatever, whether that's here in North Carolina, whether that's in California, whether that's in Vegas where you are. I'd even argue whether it's in Australia or other parts of the globe. But I was just wondering your perception of how should we train these folks that are involved in law enforcement to do something that's actually not necessarily part of their job. Because I don't know that they're trained into doing that. So I just want to hear your take on this, Apollo, and then I'll come to you, Jeff.
Well, okay. Yeah. Well, firstly, law enforcement has to stop operating on stereotype. They want to get big metadata sets to say, you know, individuals who come from this sort of background along this sort of income level and along X, Y, and Z, they do this. Well, that's stereotyping. So firstly, they have to get away from stereotyping. The second thing is that they need to make a distinction. Is this a violent offender or a non-violent offender? All right, if this is a non-violent offender and they already know who the violent offenders are because they tend to have a record early on, right? Then, okay, separate them. All right, now, is this a person who is just self-medicating? Are they having a hard time in their life? Okay, well, then this person needs to be tracked towards counseling. If they're homeless, then they probably just need a place to stay and they probably need some kind of help getting back into a home. And the thing is that they will have to, you know, people are going to have to set aside resources in order to enable that. So I think ultimately people have to stop stereotyping people. That's the first thing. Then you have to start assessing, you know, what this individual's needs are if they're nonviolent. And if they're violent, then send them to jail. But jail is supposed to be rehabilitative. So if you've got a violent offender, then I don't think that jail, if you turn the jail into another crime university, then they're going to come out and do more crime. But if you turn the jail into a university where people learn how to cope, learn how to deal with their emotions, learn how to deal with other ways of, you know, processing their emotions outside of violence, then that's one thing. And then if you're talking about someone who just simply is self-medicating and they're nonviolent and they have a mental health issue, then get them a counselor and get them someone who can help them develop coping mechanisms so that they can be the person that they want to be in our society. We need to stop thinking of mentally, you know, people who have mental health conditions as people who are of no value. And that's a lot of times not true. And we have to start seeing the value in individuals. Now, I mean, if you're a violent offender, I mean, I don't know what your value is because you're pretty destructive. You know, that's really awful. But if you are if you're just speaking solely about nonviolent offenders, I think that there is more room for constructive work. Now, police officers need to stop relying on violence. Everybody that they encounter is not violent. And they can't assume that because someone has white skin and blonde hair that they're going to be any less or more violent than someone with dark eyes and brown skin. So they have to really, really get a handle on their own training processes. They really need to get a handle on their own biases. They really need to get a handle on their own worldviews. They really could, because people don't realize the empire fell because of police violence. If you read Burmese Days with George Orwell, the empire fell because of police violence. So it doesn't help to have a brutal police force. So they have to really get around that because they are actually being very corrosive to society. And everybody else is just sort of dragged under the toe. And I guess that's how I see it. But I haven't studied this in any real depth to give you any real concrete, you know, solutions in terms of a program or a process. But that's from my own experience. That's what I've seen. I've seen that it's very easy for people to operate on stereotype. And that once you start operating on stereotype, then you completely disposed of the person and their humanity. They're then an object. And that's the big problem there.
I would definitely agree with that. Jeff, you got anything that you want to add to that?
I think you've covered quite a bit of it. I think that the solutions to mental abstractions and the way that people are being discriminated in so many different avenues and areas is a large, huge topic. And I would like to see the numbers of the population, how many people are not capable of taking care of themselves?
Right.
How many people are on the street with concrete numbers? You do a census report.
Right.
People are being paid to come to your door and talk to real, regular people, but we should know how many people are on the streets, and then like I talked to Tommy Chong in my movie, and he said, I want to help the homeless, Jeffrey. Let's build homes out of hemp for the homeless, blah, blah, blah. But the point is that start to get the celebrities and the awareness back to these people in the specific slice of pie that we're dealing with today, and then be more gentle. We don't need to throw people away. People's lives are really important. They're just as important as you and me, and there's complexities in everybody's lives. And I don't think by thousands of people dying from one earthquake or one 9/11 should get us numb to that one person who you meet on the street who can't really speak for himself. We should have compassion for them and come up with solutions to do better.
Yep, I definitely agree with you on that. You've got some great points there, Jeff, and everything. So I definitely agree with what you were saying. It's very much along those lines that we've got to have some serious reform going on, because we've not been having that kind of reform, unfortunately. I know that Apollo said he's going to have to drop off, and it looks like he did drop off, but he stayed a lot longer than he thought he was going to stay, because I thought it told him he might be 15 or 20 minutes, and it looks like it was about 2 hours and 18 minutes. So he was definitely engaged in conversation with us for a long time, and who knows, maybe he'll pop back on, or we'll get him back on another time. But I was glad to have Apollo share us.
Are you in prison right now? You look like you're in the basement.
Nope, not in the basement. I'm actually don't have my lights on, so maybe I'll turn the lights on, and it looks like Apollo's trying to come back to us and everything. So maybe I'll put my lights on and see if that gives us better light. So as soon as I will have you just pop on for a second, so I'll go full screen to Jeff for a second while I make a little bit.
Well, it's me, kids, and I really appreciate being part of the IBM.
Now I'm back. Is that better lighting there? Or do you like that better, Jeff?
It didn't change much.
Okay, well, I did adjust the light a little bit. I turned one of the lights on, so it might just be the nature of the time of day and the computer and all of that. But I did see Apollo.
I think all of our IBMers need a lighting kit, and we'll just send it to each other. And you clamp it to, and then we'll be consistent, Yeah,
just clamp it to the back of the chair or do something like that.
I got a window. That's all I got today,
Hey, the window works. The window works wonderfully. So definitely that works on a regular basis. So I see that window is a wonderful thing. So like I said,
Apollo get back in?
He's trying to. I see that he's trying to get his device on and everything. So we're hoping that he'll come back, and it looks like he's popping in and out. So I do know that he's engaging with us.
I'm thinking we have to learn from our history. So many people are so wrapped up in not talking about Hitler, not talking about cancer, not talking about climate change, being afraid of saying all these things. MS, how many people have you known with MS? I have. I've known people that have died from MS, and Jerry Lewis my whole life, raised all that money. And have they come up with a solution? Well, I think it's in the plant world.
It could be in the plant world, and yes, I do know relatives that have had MS. I've known relatives, including some that have, or at least one that has passed on. But I've definitely known folks in the MS world in terms of having multiple sclerosis. I've known folks that have had even some other ailments that are out there, whether that's
What's that one where you shake?
Huh?
What's that one where you shake?
Oh, I'm trying to remember the one where you shake. I know the one that you're talking about, but I can't think of it off the top of my head.
of our heads.
Yeah, both of us are trying to remember which one that is. But yeah, there's been a number of them that I agree that there's probably natural cures, whatever those cures are, that we're not using on a regular basis. So there are plenty of things that we probably can reach from nature and from just Mother Earth that we're not doing on any sort of regular basis. So I do know that we've got to have more conversations around those cures, whether it's cancer, whether it's, as you said, multiple sclerosis, or whether it's even some of the more simple things. Like I'm thinking that they're even on the diet aspects of how a lot of people can deal with diabetes and things that hit the African American community quite hard, that there are probably some natural cures that can even help us with that. So I don't know what your thoughts are just in general, Jeff, about natural health and what we're doing. Because I think that are you a vegan or a vegetarian? I forget.
I'm a raw vegan.
A raw vegan.
So 17 years.
Well, for those that are watching, and we'll see if Apollo pops back in, but for those that are watching, tell us the difference between like a raw vegan, a vegan, and a vegetarian. Because I hear those terms all the time, but I don't necessarily know the difference.
I don't cook my food over 118 degrees, but I'm 80-20, so I do eat some fish, because I live in the Pacific Northwest near the Alaskan salmon, so twice a year I'll have a big old slab of salmon, cooked on cedar, and I love it, but the bottom line is that I'm 80-20 raw vegan, live salads, live soups blended, smoothies all the time. I do medicinal mushrooms every day, lion's mane, reishi, and chaga, and that helps my my mental clarity. And so raw vegan is what they say is that if you have a broccoli and you have it raw or you have it cooked, what is better? Well, they're both better than meat if the meat is not well or good or has bad stuff in it from the bad farms, like antibodies, antibiotics and things like that in your meat. So the raw digests easier in your belly than the cooked or the steamed vegetable. The steamed vegetable at over 118 degrees loses its enzymes, okay, which your belly processes all your food with enzymes. And when you have enzymatic, non-rich food in your system, that's why you feel tired after eating cooked food, because your body is taking more time to process that to make it into poop. Okay? And so the raw vegans are much more energetic. And that's why I start editing at midnight when everybody's sleeping. And sometimes I watch the sun come up and sometimes I don't. I get my 6 or 7 every day, every night of sleep, and sometimes more. But because I love my sleep, but I'm totally a foodie, and I think that my friend who wrote a movie about 30 Days Raw took 10 people, and 8 out of the 10 people dropped their insulin from 200 to 80.
Oh, they went down that far? They went from 280? That's a significant drop that they had and everything like that. And, I know that you've done movies, and movies are a real big thing in terms of even like us talking about food. Like I remember that movie, it had to do with eating and McDonald's and all of that. There was
Forks Over Knives, and there was the one that was called Super Size Me.
Super Size Me. That's the one I was thinking about. Super Size Me. Yeah. That's the one I was thinking about. And then I've seen some other ones that deal with just the nature of the food industry and how a lot of times it's very harsh what we do to the animals. Because I remember I saw one of those movies. It was a documentary. And while I still do go get my burgers and some other things that are more meat oriented, it did give me some serious pause about that. So I did almost switch my eating styles after seeing that movie. But unfortunately, it didn't totally convert me over, so I will go get my hamburger.
The one with the veal farms where they have the little children veal, the small animals. That's what veal is. Veal is baby calves.
Yep, veal is baby calves, and they also show what they've done to, like, in one of the movies I saw, they show what they've done to, like, pigs and other animals, and some people might say it's just a pig, who cares? But I have seen them talk about things.
Chickens, the massive chicken farms.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, who wants a conveyor belt chicken in their meal? It's yummy, but they've got they've got substitutes for food that taste just like it. And you know what? Harley Davidson wrote on the side of their motorcycles, "Do you ride to live or live to ride?"
Wow, good point. And I think
So
we
do
do have
you
Apollo back, so I
live
want
or
to
do you
see
live to eat?
you live to eat. That's what they said.
No, like Harley said, do you live to eat or do you eat to live? Like
Oh,
they said, do you ride to live or live to ride?
and I think, unfortunately, if I'm being perfectly honest, most of us eat not necessarily because of what it's doing to keep us alive. Because a lot of times we already have our substance in terms of what we need for our food and everything of that nature. But then we've got those cravings that pop up and all of that. So sometimes I do think that we spend more time enjoying the pleasure of eating, not necessarily what the food is, because sometimes we're already full. I mean, we're plainly full. I think
If
that's
we
probably why
know
the weight
food
issues
is
exist.
medicine, if we know food is medicine and that it's going to fuck with our system, mess with our system, our body, our temple, why eat bacon grease?
Good point. I do want to bring Apollo back in. He's popped back in. I told you, Apollo, that if you come and join the IBO.TV family and you engage in the conversations, we're almost as bad as Shri, is how I met you and everything. So we'll keep you on and have conversations for about 2 or 3 hours just because it can be very enthralling and very interesting. So I know that I had originally told you 15 or 20 minutes, and you pretty much stayed for the entirety of the show. So I told you can oftentimes be engaging, and you have definitely been an engaging guest. So that being said, I did want to find out what you think about how we do with food, because we've kind of switched the topic after you got off. And I can't remember if you told me, I know you're into yoga and meditation, but I can't remember if you're a vegan, a vegetarian, or what your own eating style is. But if you wanted to share that with our audience, we'd love to hear it.
Sure. Probably skew more towards vegetarian. I think that diet is exceedingly. I think processed foods do not help. I think eating more spices, eating more grain, keep things as natural as possible. Fish is a good. Pasta's never a bad idea, but I mean, in anything in moderation. I think when it comes to fruits and vegetables, you can, hopefully, I understand why people have issues with, non-organic foods because of the pesticides, like, but still, I think eating more vegetables and fruits are a better idea than not. Um, and I think that, like the Mediterranean, the Southern Indian, or even the South, American South, they eat a lot of green. You don't have to cook them in, pork fat. You can cook them in smoked turkey, now, something like that. So I think that it is really important what we eat, because what you eat should feel better. I always put the food. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. You definitely got to have try to think about what you eat and how you eat it, because no matter what your style of eating is, and I even know some folks that are what is it? I think it's pescatarians are the ones that like only fish and things of that nature. So I do know a couple of folks that is their lifestyle. But
Yeah,
no
but
matter what
the
the lifestyle
ocean is
is,
so dirty now.
what's so dirty now, Jeff?
The ocean.
Oh, that's true. The ocean is very dirty, and who knows what you're getting when you get into the ocean and grab those foods, because we haven't even totally explored the ocean. I know a lot of folks are interested in space travel, and I'm even thinking about the ocean, that we could go much deeper down into the ocean than we've actually gone. So there's a lot of room for exploration once we get past this COVID experience and everything. I'm still, by the way, I got to tell you, Apollo, I'm really impressed. I'm about to put on the headset so I can hear you a little bit better, because the sound isn't as good as it had been. But that being said, the fact that you're even trying to come across the country during a pandemic is amazing. So I don't know what made you decide that you wanted to make this life change in the middle of a pandemic, but I am impressed that you're going ahead and making a life change during this time.
Thank you. Well, the thing is that, like I said, I never would have come to Las Vegas unless it was to help someone. And I find that my time here is done and that it is time for me to return to my own life. And the thing is that, just jumping back to the food conversation, pescatarianism, just be very mindful of what you're eating, because fish stocks are collapsing. Our consumption habits actually have a lot to do with our environment. So, I mean, just, I think at this point in time, everybody has to be responsible. You have to know about everything. I mean, that's unfortunately it's a burden, but I don't think a lot of times people are thinking. And I think people have to be more actively engaged in asking these questions. I always remind people that when the queen gets a document, it's addressed to reader number one because it's her government. She's reader number one. Every American, this is your government. You must be reader number one. So you have to read.
That makes a lot of sense, and we definitely need to get more people out there voting and things of that nature. Because I don't know what you've heard, and this goes for both you, Jeff, and Apollo. But I've heard that some folks are saying that 97% of the population has already decided who they're going to vote for. So if we were to listen to the pundits and the folks that are saying that the election has already been determined and there's no need to go out and vote because they're saying 97% have already decided. That just putting that figure out there kind of scares me because I'm sitting there going like, it's that old philosophy of you tell enough folks that they don't need to do something, they don't do it, and then that's when we get what we get. So in terms of like some of the negative folks that we've got, whether that was Reagan back in the 80s, whether that was the current person holding the office or whatever, but I do sometimes worry about the fact of hearing those figures and then the common population being like, it's in the bag, whether it's in the bag for your side or against your side. So I'm not a big fan of folks that give those kind of figures that are saying that 97% have already decided.
Well, I mean, having decided which way you're going to vote isn't your vote. You still have to vote. And that's the thing that I think, I mean, it's one of the things that I've never understood. When I was in Watts, my foster mother was a poll worker, right? So I had that experience of understanding how important it is to participate in democracy. You are responsible. That's why we have public schools. You are responsible for knowing what your government does. You are responsible for reading the telegrams and reading the documents and reading the Mueller report, reading the volume 5 out of the Senate. You are responsible. And the thing is that we like to delegate that responsibility. And then you end up with something you don't want. And then you say the system doesn't work. Well, why are you not participating?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I definitely agree with that. I want to hear what Jeff had to say.
You don't vote, you can't complain.
Right. I agree with you, Jeff.
Yep, that's very true. You definitely can't complain if you don't vote, so we got to get out there and vote. Apollo, I want you to also talk a little bit, and it was early in the conversation, so it was almost 2 hours ago and everything, that you talked about Vegas and how bad that education system is. I would argue that in terms of teaching civics, it's bad throughout the country, but you mentioned Vegas as being like Alabama, so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about why you think the education system is so bad out in Vegas and what your views are about the education system, particularly when we're talking about teaching civics. Because I personally think that I remember when I grew up and was in school in the grade school in the late 70s, there were definitely courses around that. And I remember going to college at Marquette in the 80s, and we definitely talked civics and politics. But I do think we got away from that. But I would like to hear the young person's view of this as well. So if you would, talk to us a little bit about your views of civic education and education in general. If you want to focus that around Vegas, that's cool.
Well, the thing is that I haven't really read a lot about the a lot of the the institutional documents about the education system here in Vegas. But from what I understand, from where it ranks, it is not a very highly ranked. Clark County is not a very highly ranked school district. Does that mean that I even understood that the money from the marijuana sales were supposed to go to education, but somehow the money has not gotten there. So the thing, and that's also part of it. I mean, to a certain degree, because you have the gambling, uh, because you have also, some people think that, people who don't know anything but to sell their body is good for business. Like there's there's a predation that comes along with substandard educational systems that we have to be suspicious of.
Yep, and we have the same issue here in North Carolina. The lottery, which is our state lottery and everything, is called the educational lottery. So it is supposed to go to education here as well. And I think that they may have some of that money going to education, but who knows how much of that money is truly going to education versus going back to keeping the lottery running versus to other programs. But I do know that here in North Carolina, the lottery, and we're one of the states of many that has the lottery, it is called the educational lottery.
Well, I mean, we have to also remember that, before you had these lotteries, you had tax dollars going into education, right? Tax dollars supported the school budget. That made things a lot more equal than before they started electing lottery proceeds to go into education. And then who knows where your tax dollars went, right? So the funding of education is not just political, but it's mercenary. And we have to be aware the societies that are most successful with education tend to have very good, educational institutions across the board, like Singapore, for example, Hong Kong, for example, Taiwan. They make sure, even Germany. Now, in Germany, what they do is, given your aptitude at a certain age, they may track you into certain things like vocational. This one has the aptitude to become like a doctor or a lawyer. This one has the aptitude to become a professor. So in Germany, they may tier you in your educational system, but on the other hand, there is a common standard that's expected. In the United States, we deliberately want to mislead people.
Yep, that's very interesting. That we oftentimes have to do that misleading kind of aspect and everything of that nature. You're so right about that. That too often we do try to mislead folks in whatever way that we're going to mislead them. And definitely appreciate both you and Jeff for sharing your views. And we've got about another few minutes to go, and then I'm gonna bring out the mystery guest because that's what's been running across. If you were wondering, Jeff, what was running across the banner as part of the online dinner party, which is the theme of this show, we will be having a mystery guest. Some people would say Apollo's the mystery guest because he does not want to do the being seen, and I can definitely understand that when you're going on a trip and all of that. But that being said, he is not our mystery guest. It will be a historical figure, and I've got a banner or something that will reveal them at some point. And one is international, one is national. And if folks have been watching for the last 2.5 hours or so, they've seen different facts go about them. At some point before I end the show, I will run an audio of one of the mystery guests, and then folks can tell me, hopefully in the next few minutes, who the winners are, because I haven't had any winners or I haven't anybody just mentioned it. But this is a growing process, the game. But I've got two folks that I'm going to introduce as our mystery guests later on today. So that's kind of the contest that is going on doing what we've been having going on here as we've been having conversation. There's also been banner information running that tells about the mystery guest. And like I said, just before I bring on our ambassador, which is what Jeff, what we use to end the show, I will reveal the mystery guest. But until that time, then we're just having regular dialogue like we do on all my shows, including the online dinner party. So that's what's going on. And by the way, Apollo, I don't know if Shree's ever told you this, but I personally have become a big fan of yours. I know that you're young and all of that, but you have so much insight for your age and everything. So I'm a big fan of yours. I think some other members, because you've met some of the members of the IBM.TV family, are now fans of yours as well. So once you get situated in New Jersey, I know that you sometimes will pop up on comments on that other platform, but do know that you have another home here as well, because we do reach out to people, and I've had some of even Shree's folks on some of my shows as well. So, and are reaching out to some other ones. But do know that in addition to being part of that family, you have another family here at IBM.TV.
So much for that, Mark, and thank you so much for having me and giving me the opportunity. And
yeah,
well,
thank you. I appreciate that. And by the way, Jeff was telling us a little bit about his movie that he's got going on, and I'll put that on a banner as well. But he's been involved in a number of things in the industry that deals with the lifers that need to be freed from the prison because they are in for nonviolent crime. So he has a thing called lifersthemovie.com. So how many, Jeff, would you talk to Apollo and me about those that you have already released and who they are? Because I think you've already freed another one, or are we on 3 or are we on 4?
Well, Craig Cecil just came home. I spoke with him while he was in jail for quite a while. I was an advocate just in spirit, but I didn't go to him. I didn't do any articles about him. So he just came home. So he's the third close person that I've affected. that I helped to raise the awareness with. And Jeff Bazansky was in for 21 years and 9 months, no life, no pizza, no grandkids, for 2 grams. That was his third strike, 2 grams with an informant. And so he was in jail for 21.9. And then George Monterano was in jail for 33 years for pot. And he was in solitary confinement for 5 years. And he had no windows in that room for 5 years.
And one of the things that Apollo talked about, and I don't know if you want to elaborate on it again, Apollo, was just the nature of some of the charges that you can actually go to prison for, even there in the Vegas area. Because I know that earlier on in our show today, he did mention that some of the things that you can even go to prison for there in Vegas. So if you would elaborate on that, I'd love to hear it from you, Apollo.
I was just mentioning that because Las Vegas attracts, because a lot of people in the city, a lot of times attract, individuals who may want to, think the substance. They have weed. Marijuana is expensive and easy to buy, but I mean other items are not, like mushrooms. So the thing is that there's a strong buying presence for the police. Now the thing that I with that the often individual manipulating someone who is vulnerable mentally, and I really does. And that I think that creates a very complicated ethical position for them. And I think, and the other thing that, when you have this, when you have that as the position of, then there is no real sympathy for someone who is a nonviolent offender who just may be trying to blow off something, trying to deal with the mental state because maybe that mental state will lead to a more difficult place. So, I mean, the way we think about the mind, the way about how people themselves or leave, I think a lot of this to be reorientated within the construct of mental health.
Yep, definitely agree with that we need to find ways to reorientate people and things of that nature. So we're not doing enough of that, unfortunately. So I would thoroughly agree with you on that we need to find ways to reorientate folks and get them more engaged in the greater society. So I think that that's a very true statement that you just brought up and everything. Jeff, did you have any other thoughts that you wanted to share with us on what Apollo was just sharing and just in general about the work that you're doing?
Great work, Jeff.
People in jail should not be in jail for nonviolence. I don't care if it's drug, if it's nonviolent drug offense, they should not be in jail. And they should, all these gentle souls that are pot smokers and daddies and incredible human beings get thrown in with murderers, with heavyweights that are freaking scary, and they stare you down. And the stories I've got about them using their toilet for their refrigeration unit for their sodas, and then they have to use their, it's just horrible for these gentle souls that are nonviolent to be in jail at all. Our system needs reform. And the more we talk about it, the more we may be able to change these abortion people and these people that have so many far right, concepts about what to do with human population and so on and so forth. This is not the Roman era. This is now. And, I'm friends with Marc Mothersbaugh from the group Devo, and we need to have Evo. We need to evolve. We need to come back to Gandhi and to Dalai Lama and have compassion for these souls that maybe can't take care of themselves, but maybe there's plant medicine or there's a compassion medicine that'll help these people to be better souls. Maybe there's a place on the planet like they used to have these communes. Maybe it's a hotel that is just for people that can't take care of themselves. But there's fun and there's places, they're not locked down.
Well, Jeff, let me just add this in. When Mrs. Luce was the wife of the guy who started Time magazine, Mr. Luce, and she did LSD. And she said, "Oh my God," she tells Nixon at a dinner party, "We have to lock this up because poor people couldn't get it." The reason why they created the whole DEA was because they were afraid that people were going to start doing drugs and they weren't going to go to work and be responsible and pay taxes and all the rest of it. And so people thought by changing, you should be punished for changing your mental state. And that's what this is all about. Whether or not people have the right to change their mental state. And we know they do. I can sit here and do meditation and change my mental state, but no one's going to arrest me. But if I do it with a substance, then that's a problem. And I think that's where we have to start figuring this out.
Well, all my people say nobody should be in jail for a plant.
Right. I agree with you. But the reason why I put them in jail for the plant versus eating a green bean, right, is because it changes your mental state. That's what this is all
Right. But we come back to my statement. Nobody beat their wife on pot, but alcohol is legal.
right.
Yep, good point that both of y'all are making. Everything. I know we're getting ready to wind down, showing that I do need to have the audio of the mystery guests and also have reveal them on the banner very shortly. One other issue I just want to touch with really quickly. I know we're going to divert, but we love doing that here on the conversation. But Apollo, you are also, as you mentioned earlier in the show, somebody that went through the foster system and the adoption system. So I know this is a broad topic, but hopefully we'll have you back on in the not too distant future. But if you could share with us a little bit about how that is important to you and also what you think some of the benefits of are being part of the adoptive and foster community. Because actually my younger brother had foster kids in the past. He's actually got my two natural nephews. So he doesn't, as far as I know, have any foster kids now, but I do know he's had foster kids in the past, and I do know folks that have adopted. So that being part of your linear history, I would love for you to share a little bit about how you feel about that particular field and the importance of it.
Well, I mean, I think that it's important for children who are in vulnerable situations to have stable environments so that they can at least have a foundation that they can build an adult life from, a solid foundation that they can build an adult life from. That's not always going to happen with the biological family because of material conditions. Maybe the mother doesn't know how to care for her kids. So rather than putting them in foster care, maybe help the mother how to become a better parent. I think that it's not something that I use to define myself by. It is something that I have to, I acknowledge because I've gone through it. But the thing is that when I look at foster care and adoption, the thing is that it should always be in the best interest of the individual being fostered because we recognize that something has broken in our society and we have other people of good souls, good character who step in and who help make sure that this individual stays on a good path and can become a part of American society. I think one of the things that I'm happy with is that I was successful. I went through the foster care system. I've noticed that, I had a great deal of freedom because I did not have a family burdening me. I did not have parents saying this or that. I didn't have anyone saying, think this way or think that way for any reason. So I had this great freedom to kind of make up who I am as I went along. But I think that there's good and bad to everything. And I think ultimately the best sort of, foster care would be the place where children or young adults or teens rather are given all the empowerment that they need to become productive, law-abiding citizens in America. That's
Appreciate that. Did you have something you wanted to add, Jeff, before I bring up this audio tape of one of our mystery guests and then get ready to wind up in another 10 minutes or so? But did you have something you wanted to add?
I think that we're on good topics. It's just all about the elders being able to remind us about the history, about the people that came before us where they were bad, they were wrong, they didn't actually produce goodness, love, joy, and happiness. They produced confusion, conflict, and conspiracy. So I think that we as stewards and as adults, as grandmothers and grandfathers, that we need to tell more stories. We need to get back to the stories and have story time, and then turn out more gentle. The planet needs to be more gentle.
No, but definitely agree with you on that. We definitely need to be more gentle and all that. So I'm going to play this audio of one of our mystery guests, and then I will come back and wrap up some conversation and also reveal the mystery guest. But this is some audio of one of them.
Actress. But what am I saying? We did have this sense of racial identity. I remember in our family finding these little playlets, 30 Years of Freedom. And then a second little pamphlet, 50 Years of Freedom. And these were little playlets that had been written up for community groups to dramatize. And one must have referred, say, to about 1890 or maybe 1895. And the other one must have been maybe 20, 25?
Well, so then are you saying that despite the problems and the harm of segregation, that also there were many things of value that came out of the fact that Black people were so close to each other?
Mm-hmm.
And was there in fact something even comfortable about that Black community, that community that was totally Black, would you say?
I am sure that there were many positive experiences about it, as I think, for example, of the social life and the community life. I think of White Rock Baptist Church, St. Joseph Baptist Church. I think
AME, the AME Church.
Yes, the AME Church, St. Joseph AME Church. Mother Zion AME Church. I think of many kinds of community activities that took place in these community centers, so to speak. And these were comfortable. The point at which life became unbearable was in the contact with the white world, mm-hmm. in the sense of business contacts or, going into the community and being made to feel inferior by all the signs and symbols and the etiquette, the racial etiquette in terms of your name, being spelled by your first name, or people addressing adult Negroes as auntie and uncle and maybe boy and, this kind of thing. In the relationships between the superiors, the school official superiors, and the teachers. And since I had so many relatives who were teachers, I was very aware of the hierarchy of the relationships and the interracial relationships in the school system. The superintendent or the supervisor who comes in and calls your teacher by her first name. This I think I wrote about in Proud Shoes. So the hatred of segregation was not hatred of community life among Negroes. It was finding barriers that hemmed you in, that you were not free to go and come as you chose. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
All right, folks, I'm back in everything. I don't know how much you heard of that, but definitely there's some great conversation there, and I'm hoping that folks will learn more, and I'm getting ready to run the banners again, but we haven't had a winner. So these folks may reappear, but definitely remember that you had to watch during the show and you had to do things of that nature. So if they reappear, it won't be next week. I can tell you that. So I'll have some other folks that'll be on as well. But that being said, I'm going to run a few more of the clues out there. So this is one of the clues. W.E.B. Du Bois attended a Pan-African event that I organized. That's the international person. And then we have this quote from our international person as well, which is that our children may learn about the heroes of the past. Our task is to make ourselves, the architect of the future. So that's some guests of things that were going on. And also there was a person that mentioned that their name was involved with the Burning Spear in terms of their name and everything. So their name actually has Burning Spear in the title. That's our international person. And they were also involved with the Mau Mau movement. So that's our clues for the international person. And then our clues for the local person, or the national person, I should say, and I'm going to go up to that, is that they have a residential college named after them at Yale. And that's actually who we heard, by the way. My Durham house, and that means Durham, North Carolina, is a historical landmark. And in their own letters, they talked about their struggle with gender and sexual identity. So before I reveal who these guests are and the mystery guests and everything as we wind down the show, I'm going to put Apollo and Jeff on the spot. Because like I said, they can't win because Apollo is my guest and Jeff is part of the team. And it's pretty much over. So we're not going to have a winner today. But that being said, and we'll continue this contest again next week, I'm going to see if Apollo or Jeff have an idea as to who they think the mystery guests are. Any thoughts? Everybody's shaking their head. Nobody's got any clue.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one.
Apollo, you got any ideas?
Mau Mau was, I want to say Kenyatta, but I don't know if that's anymore. I don't know.
Did you? What did you say for one of them?
I threw a name Kenyatta as one of the names. That's from Kenya. There's Mau Mau, but no.
Well, actually, you're actually a pretty smart cat and everything, because one of the mystery guests is Jomo. And what is Jomo's last name, Apollo?
Kenyatta.
That is correct. So you are right about one of the mystery guests. So definitely you did a good job. You got one of them right and everything. For those of you that study civil rights and know civil rights and things of that nature, the other mystery guest was involved in the writing of the Brown versus Board of Education information, because even though Thurgood Marshall and them get the credit, it was actually somebody from here in North Carolina that did a lot of the groundwork research and also explored a lot in terms of her gender and sexuality and things of that nature. And she was also the first Black female, African-American female Episcopalian priest. So that person, for those that are wondering, and I will reveal their pictures now as one of the brands so that folks can see what they look like as well. But yes, you are correct. Our mystery guest for this particular one is Jomo Kenyatta, and that is Mr. Kenyatta right there. So that is our international person. So Apollo, you did a great job. Unfortunately, you're a guest, so you don't count in terms of like getting the prize. But do watch next week. I'm gonna have some more amazing guests, and you were good. You guessed right, so you might be in the running as well. So I might even make an exception to the rule. I have to think about that, Apollo. And then for those of you that are watching that do not know this name, a lot of folks have started hearing about this young lady. Her name is Pauli Murray. That is the other person that was our other mystery guest, but she is the one that was involved with the creation of the Brown versus Board of Education information and things of that nature. She was also a major proponent of a lot of activism. Some people would even argue that she was a forefront of, well, actually, she did create and was one of the founders of both NOW, the National Organization for Women, and CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. And some people have even argued that she was very much involved in the whole LGBT community before it was fashionable, because some people have said that she did not even, there's some talk that she may not have even come out, and whether she did or did not is up for history and history's interpretation. But if she did, it wasn't until after she passed. But I know that there have been interviews with relatives of hers, and they did say that she had a lifelong partner that was of the same gender, and that there is a good possibility that she may have been involved in that lifestyle and everything. But whether she was or wasn't, there is no doubt that she was an advocate of rights, both for women, for LGBT, for the African American community, and for a number of other folks as well. So those are our two folks. They're our mystery guests. That is Paulie Murray, who y'all are looking at right now, and Mr. Kenyatta, Jomo Kenyatta. So definitely those are our two mystery guests. Definitely that is the show, and we're wrapping it up. So I want to thank both you, Apollo, for being on here with us and for being a special guest with us. I also want to thank Jeff for joining us. Jeff joined us toward the end of the show. We also had with us Jim Eade, and we had Shakeel Latimer. So a lot of the IBM TV family was here, but there were a number of other ones also that have appeared on the show in the past. But that's the way that the game works. So definitely keep that in mind. You'll see these letters going across the screen. Do not, I repeat, do not go onto the line now on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, or something like that and think that you have won by telling me the end, by always going to the end of the show and then telling me who it was, because you have to do it during the time of the show to win. So I do not want folks going back telling me, hey, I know the answer. Of course you know the answer. You've now gone and gotten the answer. So it has to be during the course of the show. So, Apollo, once again, I do want to thank you for joining me. You told me you were all going to join me for 15 minutes. You wound up being here for about 3 hours.
For having me. Actually, yeah, I surprised myself, but the conversation kept going. It was good.
Thank you. And that's what we do. The conversation goes is oftentimes very engaging. And I think that that's what you found, that it's very engaging conversation. So I'm getting ready to put up our ambassador. We have an ambassador. It's the one of our producers, and I'm a producer as well. But it's one of our producers' daughter, and she gives us tips about how to handle COVID and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm getting ready to pull that up and bring that up for folks to check out. If folks are wondering why the scenery changed, the tape that I'm going to pull is actually on another platform and everything, so I need to grab it from there. But this isn't a major show that we have, which is Tish Oakley's Plant a Seed, and that is on Saturday, right? Saturday afternoon at 1 o'clock. So definitely keep that in mind. Keep Jeff Eichen's Weed Wednesdays on mind, which is right before me. Of course, I know Shakeel is oftentimes doing a number of appearances. Jim Eade, who we had on earlier, has a chess show, Chess Without Borders, and we've got a number of other great shows as well. So that being said, I'm going to bring in the ambassador, and then I'll bring in our announcement about IBM TV, and then I might holler at Apollo offline, but that's nothing, anything that y'all folks need to be concerned about. And then I've got more meetings to go to because I'm just a busy person right here in Durham, North Carolina. But here's the ambassador.
Coronavirus से कैसे बचेंगे? Okay, hand होकर और ऐसे अपने खांसी जब आएगी तो ऐसे करेंगे अच्छू अच्छू और कोरोना वायरस को धन्यवाद हमारा म्यूजिक सुनने का.
Appreciate that. And right now we'll have the thing. In the broadcast.